6 months had passed since Ron became a junior employee at a well-known company, and he considered this a great opportunity for himself. True, his position had one significant drawback, in the form of colleagues who pushed him around in every possible way and blamed their work on the new guy. Despite all this, Ron found the strength to smile at his older colleagues, even if it bothered him. Already once a day he was in the restroom, but at the same time he never rested, accumulating fatigue and losing all motivation for his work. While making coffee, he realized that he was simply being used, and that working as an intern did not bring the desired effect. Unexpectedly for the main character, a beautiful girl appeared next to him, who was noticeably kinder to him than his colleagues. Linda had been taking care of Ron since his internship, since they attended the same university and was older than him. During the conversation, the guy awkwardly held a glass of coffee and it spilled on his hand, causing intense pain, and slipped out of his hand. This greatly puzzled Linda, and she immediately offered her help. Ron was at a loss and didn't want to inconvenience his older colleague, but she insisted on helping him and he couldn't help himself. The only thing that embarrassed the main character was the open shape of Linda's dress, and since she was too close, Ron could not take his eyes off her beautiful body. At that moment, the dissatisfied voice of the boss was heard behind him, who asked the main character to deliver gifts to the departments where the employees worked. Ron had to argue that this was not his job, to which the boss replied that this was some kind of tour of the departments for familiarization. Linda noticed some tension between the two men and volunteered to help Ron, to which she received the good advice of her boss not to worry about such a small thing, and that the intern could handle it himself. Realizing that she couldn't help, Linda promised the main character a walk together, which in turn made the guy very happy. When she left, the boss, without hiding his mockery, shamelessly threw the bag of gifts in Ron's face, which of course he could not expect. As a result, the package fell to the floor and small, well-packed gifts rolled out of it. The boss clearly didn't like this, and without hiding his disgust, he scolded the intern for his mistake and ordered him to take his time and collect everything. While Ron slowly put the boxes back into the bag, the boss watched and entertained the thought that the main character would forever grovel before him. When the trainee finished, the boss left with a very satisfied face, from which Ron realized that this was not a simple attitude of a superior to a subordinate, but certainly a mockery of him. Suddenly, the phone rang in Ron's pocket and he, reacting to this, looked at what it could be. On the phone, there was an advertisement for a mobile game with a very interesting context, from which the main character at first fell into a stupor, but then decided to download this game and see what it was like. And the moment the guy pressed the download button, a golden glow began to emanate from the phone screen and began to envelop him. Not expecting this, Ron was immediately sucked into the portal and spat out, clearly not where he was before. Some noise previously unknown to his ears attracted his attention, and he turned around to make sure that there was nothing incomprehensible behind him. And imagine his surprise when, behind the metal mesh, he saw a crowd of disgusting creatures that were somewhat reminiscent of people, only with unusually scary faces. Since such creatures can often be seen in films or games, Ron immediately guessed that these were real zombies, and they were located a couple of meters from him, and the only barrier between them was this flimsy mesh. At some point, the main character saw a board in front of him with information that he could move between his world and the world of the apocalypse. This information board prevented him from noticing that a gap had opened in the only barrier between him and the zombie. Instantly realizing that it was time to leave, Ron grabbed the box with the gift and rushed in the opposite direction of it all. In desperation, he ran without looking back with all his might and tried to call anyone for help. There was a shout behind him, calling him to duck, and the guy turned around to see a girl with a couple of grenades, which she threw into the crowd of the dead. A second later, she landed between the zombie and the guy, and there was a big explosion, in the background of which Ron's savior was located. After thanking her, she said that she was a hunter and this was just her job, and the main character helped in resolving some problems. Since Ron didn't have any money, he decided to offer her a tasty treat from the gift as payment for saving her. To the surprise of the main character, the girl did not know what it was, but she accepted this strange edible object and even decided to try it. She simply lost her senses from the taste of this delicacy, and it seemed that in her life she had never eaten anything tastier than this. After a short meal, she gave the guy payment for this delicacy, saying that such a thing cannot be eaten for free, and this payment turned out to be gold. On this note, she began to leave and said that her name was Lena, and with luck, they would be able to see each other again. After a short journey, Ron came across a settlement, which was a trading settlement, and against the backdrop of multi-story buildings, it looked, to put it mildly, in contrast. The main character immediately began selling his delicacies because he realized that he could make money from this. It turned out that they had heard about this delicacy only from their older relatives who lived before the apocalypse, and everyone was interested in it. When the main character was asked how much such a treat costs, he, without thinking twice, answered that it would cost 1 gram of gold per gram of product. This price greatly outraged the local inhabitants, and Ron heard that no one could afford to buy such a thing for that kind of money. To these objections, the guy calmly explained this cost by saying that no one knows how long he will live, but it's always worth trying something new and tasty. One of those present caught this meaning and, confirming the words of the main character, bought 50 grams of the delicacy for tasting. Behind the stranger, dissatisfied exclamations were immediately heard that the mercenaries were too rich and could afford more than others. The mercenary, accustomed to eating anything to survive, had already forgotten what delicious food was and was in seventh heaven from the combination of taste in his mouth. After trying it, he immediately asked to sell him 2 more halves of the delicacy, but with different tastes, offering 100 grams of gold for them. Meanwhile, the rest of those present realized that they were missing out on something unusually tasty, and began to demand that they sell them at least 10 grams of the delicacy. Everyone liked the taste of this unusual something, and they enjoyed shares of this delicious moment with undisguised pleasure. Night fell imperceptibly, and Ron really enjoyed looking at the bag of gold that he was able to earn in just 1 day. This prospect not only lifted the mood, but also increased motivation for further sales, since the main character could receive his monthly salary in just a couple of months of such sales. And at the most joyful moment in his life, he felt something cold and sharp that rested on his side, and a call not to twitch. It was a typical robbery, from which he learned that a certain influential person was very interested in him. It was practically suicidal to twitch in such a situation, but I also didn't want to give away my honestly earned gold, and Ron was trying hard to find a way out of this deplorable situation. Since he was only thinking about the robbery, he did not take into account that it could also be an assassination attempt, which in fact turned out to be the case, and the killer admitted it without hesitation. And at the moment when the knife was already swung, the system reported that the ability to move between worlds had rolled back and could be used again. The protagonist immediately accepted the return request from the system, causing the knife to pass through him. The killer, who did not expect such a turn of events, was in complete bewilderment and lack of understanding of what was happening, since he had never seen anything like this. And where could he have seen it? At the same time, Ron was lying on the sofa in his room, sincerely glad that the cooldown rolled back before he was killed. He was also glad that several delicacies from his world cost a lot of money in another, as well as the cooldown of the skill, which lasted only 12 hours. At work, the boss recalled the intern's misdeed and stated that the main character did not value him 1 bit as a boss, and this was undoubtedly annoying. The stay in another world did not pass without a trace, and now Ron was able to refuse his boss, saying that he was not a courier and got a job at the company to develop his skills. And he immediately had to refuse his senior colleague's request to make him coffee, given that it was said too familiarly. In turn, the senior colleague did not appreciate this action and painfully pricked the boss with the words that he could not subordinate. The chief reacted calmly to this taunt, explaining the youth's behavior as ignorant, and turning towards Ron, he said that not everything had been decided yet. Linda met the main character, and she was clearly surprised by his equanimity and determination. But he said that this was her merit, because she taught him this all the time. But he did not say that his confidence was because of the money that he now had. Looking at his watch, he noticed that the time before the skill cooldown had almost come, and soon he would again experience the delights of another world. Since he did not leave the coordinates, the transfer occurred randomly, and Ron ended up in a flat area full of green grass. He had a heavy backpack behind him, into which he had prudently put canned food, but he absolutely did not understand where to go and where he was now. When suddenly someone put a hand on his shoulder, without noticing anyone before, the main character decided to ask where to go and turned around. How many obscenities burst out of him when he saw that it was a crowd of zombies, and without wasting a second, he rushed off for another long run. But the backpack turned out to be too heavy and greatly slowed Ron down on the path to a bright future, and he urgently needed to do something. Nothing better came to mind than opening canned food and throwing it at the zombies' feet as an offering in case they stopped chasing him. And this trick worked. The zombies stopped for a while and began to try canned food, which made it possible to run a little further from them. This adventure cost the main character not a small amount of canned food, but to be precise, half of his supplies, which was a serious loss for the business. The zombies were approaching again, inexorably closing the distance, and with a displeased growl, they did not like the offering. Ron quickly realized that canned food wouldn't satisfy them. They needed live human flesh, which meant there wasn't much choice, and he decided to fight. Since a quick decision was required, the main character climbed into the system board and began looking to exchange his wallet for something useful. And it turned out to be combat skills that cost 100 points. One of the zombies had already bent down on him, emitting a terrible guttural growl, but it was too late. Ron, with a lightning-quick reaction, kicked the zombie in the stomach with a roundhouse, leaving no chance for the body to remain on its feet. Now that he had basic melee combat skill, he was not the least bit afraid of these creatures, but rather wanted to take out his anger on them for spoiling the goods. He began to cut apart the zombies with his bare hands, one after another, sparing no effort, while confidently controlling his body and coordination. Considering how weak he was before gaining this skill, Ron was pleasantly surprised, because now he could take down 3 zombies with his bare hands. Suddenly, behind him, he heard the sound of an engine and praise for the show he had provided. The owners of the car introduced themselves as hunters and explained that they wanted to help when they saw the main character and a bunch of zombies, but were pleasantly surprised by what happened. This calm dialogue was interrupted by noise from the side, and this noise turned out to be a crowd of zombies that was rapidly flying straight towards the people. The hunters reacted instantly and, hitting the clutch, shouted to Ron to get into the car, which he was undoubtedly happy about. It was better than running away on his own 2 feet. Considering the slowness of zombies in science fiction films, the real ones could give them a head start and compete with track and field athletes in running speed. The main character was immediately provided with a firearm, and it was obviously automatic, reminding that ammunition is very expensive, and it is advisable not to miss. The partner himself shot quite accurately and managed to hit the heads of dead bodies on the move without much difficulty, which is what he expected from Ron. And it was a no-brainer that marksmanship during the apocalypse was a very important and integral skill. For a moment, the main character remembered that he was from a peaceful era and could not use weapons, and did not know how. Fortunately, the system also had such a skill. It was called Basic Weapon Mastery, and in this situation it came in handy like no other. Having acquired such a useful skill, shooting did not seem unnatural or new, but rather familiar, and Ron immediately took advantage of it. However, among the zombies there was some unusual specimen. It was noticeably different from the others, and it seemed that the bullets did not take it. Despite his high survivability, he was unusually fast and quickly approached the car. After all, Level 2 zombies are more dangerous than ordinary ones. While the passengers were deciding what to do with these zombies, he leveled with the car and grabbed the hunter by the neck. After that, he jumped away from the car with the hunter in his hand and slammed him into the ground at full speed. This was accompanied by painful screams. After landing, the monster began to strangle its victim with outright bloodthirstiness, which was clearly visible on its face. Ron, who was watching everything from the side, could not stand it and rushed to the hunter's aid, clearly realizing that a fight could not be avoided. At full speed, he slammed his knee into the zombie, causing him to let go of his hands and lose his balance. Due to inertia, his body was pulled to the side, and he fell. Without wasting any time, the main character stuck the barrel of the machine gun directly into his mouth and pulled the trigger. The hunters once again praised the boy for his strength and for the fact that he was able to kill level 2 zombies with such ease. After the dialogue, the recovered hunter began to delve into the head of the killed mutant. The purpose of this act was not yet clear. At the end of this action, he took out a blue crystal and showed it to the main character, who had more questions than answers, and he was told about the importance of these crystals and what they could be. Despite the fact that it was far from a cheap crystal, the hunter handed it to Ron as payment for his saved life. The guy couldn't believe that he was so easily given such a valuable thing and completely free of charge. The hunter explained that the crystal may be valuable, but a saved life is much more valuable, and his comrade supported him. They showed white crystals and explained that they may not be so valuable, but they could cover their expenses, which means there is no need to worry. Ron immediately made several surefire conclusions for himself. Being a hunter is a very profitable activity, albeit risky. The elder hunter threw his hand on the main character's shoulder and asked if he wanted to join them. The younger one explained this by saying that this happens to newcomers who have at least some talent, to which the older one said that regardless of the answer, they could give Ron a ride to the nearest town. And so the car started moving. They had to travel quite a distance to get to the nearest populated area. Along the way, the main character looked at his blue trophy and thought about its value. It seemed to him that there was some energy in this crystal that could have an effect. As a sign of response to his thoughts, the system offered to exchange this crystal for points, which was a new surprise for Ron. He agreed to the exchange without hesitation, and at that moment the crystal began to split into many small fragments and disappear into the depths of the screen. A sincere smile appeared on the protagonist's face when he saw the result of the exchange. The crystal cost as much as 100 grams of gold, which was a very good indicator. The system also offered its owner a new option, which mentioned the frequent use of items and the ability to expand the inventory by 1 square meter for 100 points. This was undoubtedly a good offer, and Ron accepted it. Meanwhile, the group arrived at a refugee camp through which the road to the settlement passed. The place was as unpleasant as possible, but not because of disgust or anything like that, but because of the unbearability of looking at starving people in need of absolutely everything they could possibly need. The main character saw a picture of a little girl standing in front of the car and begging for some food. It was clear from her that she was very emaciated and clearly in need of food, while all this was a child. It would seem that no one could refuse these innocent children's eyes. But a shot was fired and blood gushed from the little body. She did not even understand what happened. The driver of that red car shot her. With ardent hatred, he yelled at the girl's lifeless body, "Don't you dare touch her, get out of the way," and similar nonsense. Something inside Ron clicked with such force that his anger had nowhere to go. Literally in a second, he hated this man with all his heart. However, his comrade stopped him from doing something irreparable, explaining that they live in such a world where life has no value and power rules everything. This girl was not killed in vain. She became a reminder to the main character that this world is radically different from his native one, and if he is weak, he will be killed. At the entrance to the settlement, there was a guard who checked vehicles and passes to enter the settlement. He recognized the older hunter named Autumn, and a smile shone on his face. He asked with interest about today's outing. Since the guard was indebted to Autumn, he asked him to make a pass for Ron, since he did not have one. The settlement was surprisingly large, had a huge fence with guard towers around the perimeter, as well as a large number of various buildings. Here the paths of the hunters and the main character diverged, since their base was in a different place, and Ron thanked them for their help with the pass. The hunters drove on, and the guy waved after them. Now the time had come to sell what he had come all this way for. Of course, it was canned goods, and he hoped to get a decent amount for them. On one side, a guy was selling a new SUV, loudly announcing a 70% discount, which was truly generous for such a car. On the other hand, the vaguely looking guy was pleased with the alcohol, which was produced before the apocalypse for crazy money. And while Ron was thinking about the serenity of this place, his view was blocked by a suspicious and very playful man. This man mistook the main character for a rich man and decided to sell him one of his machines, clearly hinting that the purchase would be worth it. However, it did not immediately dawn on the guy that this was a merchant, and he indignantly asked whether it was normal to rob in broad daylight, and even with a weapon. But having realized that he was not in danger, he still sincerely did not understand what the weapon had to do with him. It turned out that the merchant had a trained eye, and he immediately noticed the guy as he got out of the hunter's car, which led the merchant to the idea that perhaps the main character would need a weapon. Ron was surprised that the dealer was selling exactly weapons and nothing else, which caused a misunderstanding of how legal it was. But the seller reassured him, convincing him of its complete legality. Having sorted out the legality, the seller went on the offensive and gave a 20% discount on this machine, only 5 blue crystals, to which he was refused. Then the seller asked if the main character could have gold since there were no blue crystals, to which he received the same answer. Not giving up, the seller offered an absolute bargain for 200 potatoes, and even that was unsuccessful. After so many unsuccessful offers, his face changed, and instead of friendliness, hostility, and disgust towards the poor buyer appeared. Only he didn't take into account that Ron had an ace up his sleeve, which he hid in his inventory just for this case. And at that moment, the main character could no longer be stopped. He was looking forward to seeing the face of this merchant when he opened the can. The smell alone began to drive the merchant crazy. Since it definitely smelled very tasty, there was no problem agreeing with the main character to exchange weapons for just one can of this strange food. But as it turned out, the weapon was without ammunition, and this seemed strange to Ron. But the merchant explained that the trade in ammunition is illegal, and they can only be bought at a special warehouse. After walking for some time, the guy was still able to find this warehouse and discovered that it was in demand among hunters and mercenaries whose lives were closely connected with weapons. Since he knew little about the caliber of his weapon, he simply asked about the availability of ammunition for his rifle, and yes, there was ammo available. However, this surprised the guy at least by the fact that the price of 10 cartridges was equal to 1 gram of gold, which was not a cheap pleasure. The seller, a happy, pretty girl, explained this price by saying that a bullet can often save the owner's life, even if there is only one bullet. Seeing the surprise on the guy's face at the price, she was skeptical about his solvency, but he unexpectedly took out a whole bar of gold. This instantly cast aside all doubts about his poverty, and she quickly prepared a pile of cartridges for her buyer. And also realizing that the guy could be really rich, she took out her business card straight from her bra, which puzzled Ron a little. Taking the business card, he realized that in this world, unlike his, you can buy almost anything you want, be it a weapon or ammunition for it, or maybe something worse. Having sold all the canned food and returned home, the guy laid out all the weapons and ammunition he had acquired on his bed and thought about his not very large profit. Suddenly there was a knock on his door, and this puzzled the guy since he was not expecting guests. And even if he had, he definitely hadn't taken into account the presence of weapons on the bed. It certainly wasn't the best idea for having someone over, especially in his world. A very familiar voice came from behind the door, which did not cause any suspicious alarm, but was still at the wrong time, and it was Linda. Since his older colleague, although adored, still did not have a bunch of firearms on the bed, he began frantically trying to figure out where to hide it. And I couldn't think of anything better than hiding everything under my bed, even if it was as stupid as possible. Nothing better came to mind. Linda was indeed on the threshold. As always, she was very beautiful. But Ron clearly did not understand why she came to visit him. She, as usual, was in high spirits and asked why he was fiddling around behind the door for so long, to which a completely logical explanation was given, related to quick cleaning. Since the guest needed to offer something, Ron climbed into the refrigerator and was briefly struck by the thought that Linda was not only good to the girl, she was also an excellent cook. Throwing a dreamy glance in her direction, he thought that it would be nice if such a beautiful girl were his wife, since she was also very sensitive. He would come home from work exhausted and tired from a hard day at work and could proudly say, "Dear, I'm home." She, in turn, would meet him in a cute apron and would be interested in what he would like to do, eat, maybe a bath, or take her. In reality, Linda was already sitting on the bed and looking around the room trying to find something indecent, since she had never seen men's rooms before. Ron replied with a little embarrassment that he was a decent young man and there was nothing of any obscenity in his room. But ironically, Linda paid attention precisely to the floor, next to the bed, where the barrel of a recently hidden weapon was sticking out. This was too unexpected for the main character. He immediately realized that she definitely shouldn't see this. That's why he rushed towards her with one thought: she shouldn't see what was stored there. But by an absurd accident, he pushed her onto the bed and ended up on top himself, clearly not expecting such a turn of events. He jumped up and tried to justify it by saying that Linda was very beautiful and he could not resist such temptation. To the surprise of the main character, Linda reacted quite normally if we did not take into account excessive embarrassment. As she left, she said that it was normal for young guys his age to want a beautiful girl. Ron already thought that Linda would hate him and would no longer communicate with him. But she, closing the door, said that she was pleased to hear this from him. The room became empty. The main character stood empty in it with a very happy face, not believing that this really happened. But slapping himself on the cheeks, he quickly brought himself to his senses and began to prepare for the next move to another world, since this was an extremely important task. Walking around his hometown, he thought that selling canned food in large quantities would attract a lot of unnecessary attention, and he needed to find something simpler. And then a man with a sign about selling potatoes caught his eye, and this idea seemed great to the main character. Ron asked about the cost of potatoes, to which he received the answer that this year was not very successful for the seller, and if the main character buys, he will be given a 20% discount. The guy said that he would buy potatoes from the man, and the seller asked how many potatoes the main character needed. To this, the guy said that he needed all the potatoes that were available, but only on the condition that they were delivered directly to his door. From such generosity of the buyer, the man could not stand it and tore his t-shirt, exposing his bare, muscular torso, shouting that delivery of potatoes would not be a problem for him. Only at that moment did the guy realize that he should have first found out how many potatoes the man had. But good thoughts tend to be late. Delivery, as stated, did not cause any problems, and there was a huge mountain of potatoes lying in front of the guy's door, which without a doubt was too much even for his ideas. After some time, he returned to the settlement, and it was still the same simple and had almost nothing from the previous civilization. Packing himself with potatoes, the guy thought about how popular his sale would be, and whether it would be popular at all. The sound of metal being forged could be heard from somewhere nearby, which was unusual in a world with firearms. Passing by, the guy stopped to look and saw a real forge and a blacksmith forging some kind of workpiece. The guy was clearly perplexed by what was happening and asked about the advisability of using knives while carrying a firearm. The blacksmith reacted calmly to this and said that firearms need constant care and replenishment of ammunition. In addition to all this, they are a source of noise and can attract more zombies. This seemed like an undeniable advantage, and the guy decided that having a system with many skills, he could use melee weapons, and it was worth buying one for himself. But it was still not clear the cost of edged weapons and what they were generally sold for, to which the blacksmith said that he was not interested in money, but only in food, and tasty food at that. Ron decided to offer him potatoes as food, even though he himself thought that the blacksmith would not like this idea. However, the blacksmith was very surprised by such food. He was especially surprised by the purity of these potatoes, and it was clear that he liked them, which was understandable, since they were grown in another world. The blacksmith smiled good-naturedly. This brought back pleasant memories from the past, and he offered his best katana for these potatoes. Unsheathing the katana, he said that it was based on crystals from corpses, and it was capable of inflicting additional damage to zombies, as well as absorbing their blood. Taking the katana into his hands, the hero noticed that it was very sharp and could quickly become dull, but the blacksmith assured that after it absorbed the blood of zombies, it was restored. After such a discovery, the guy realized that just one bag of potatoes for such an unusual and most likely powerful weapon was a very good deal. Once he had a new weapon, he opened the system and began to look for the appropriate skill in using melee weapons, and this one was just for a katana and cost the same 100 points. Ron had a lot of fun testing out his new weapon, so he went into the nearby forest to hunt zombies. And the zombies didn't have to wait long. Walking a little deeper into the forest, the guy heard a familiar noise behind him. However, now he was not afraid of them, given that he had become much stronger since his first stay in this alien world. Accordingly, he was ready for this attack. With a slight movement, thanks to his basic katana skills, he was quickly able to deal with the zombies. As the blacksmith promised, the katana actually absorbed the blood of zombies, which seemed something unnatural. Having examined the katana after the battle, the main hero was convinced that the katana had indeed become a little sharper, and this could not but rejoice. Since there was no longer any danger, it was necessary to take the crystals from the zombie corpses for their further sale. And when the crystals were removed, Ron heard shots not far away, which made him wary because he did not know what to do. At this time, the zombies' heads were flying apart from clear hits to the head, and this damage did not allow them to move anymore. A girl in a red jacket was shooting, and she was clearly not happy that these crystals were not enough for her needs. Unexpectedly, she was attacked by no ordinary zombie since she was different from the rest with great speed and a long tongue. However, the zombies of the second level are stronger and are not afraid of being hit by a pistol which the hunter wielded, and there was no noticeable damage. The huntress was not stupid and understood that the power of a shot from a pistol was not enough, but there was no choice, and she reached for the next clip. At this moment, the zombie reacted faster and grabbed the hunter's hand, in which she was holding a new clip. This took the girl by surprise, and from the unexpectedly strong grip, her hand unclenched, and the clip fell to the floor, which did not bode well. By the time the hunter realized that she had been grabbed by the hand, she was already completely enveloped in the mutant's tongue. Moreover, this monster was in no hurry to kill her. He decided to play with her a little, and began to slowly move the end of his tongue along her neck, which looked very disgusting. Realizing that she would not be able to free herself and that something irreparable would happen, the girl screamed at the top of her voice for help. At that moment, Ron appeared from behind the tree trunks and warned her of the danger, taking his katana at the ready. In one simple movement, he was able to cut off the monster's tongue, thereby freeing the girl from its strong grip. The next moment, the main character decided to end this fight and rushed into the attack, taking a fighting position, but he did not take into account the fact that the more unusual the zombie, the more unusual abilities he had, and one of them was regeneration and quite fast. Since the guy did not expect this from the attack, he quickly went on the defensive, covering himself with a katana, but his tongue wrapped around it like a whip. Considering the strength of this difficult zombie, he was unable to hold the katana in his hands, and the enemy threw it aside without much difficulty. Fun fact, these zombies also had some semblance of intelligence, and realizing that the victim was defenseless, the zombies began to laugh loudly, anticipating their victory. Suddenly, his body began to be torn apart by a hail of shells fired in his direction, and before his death, he could not even understand what had happened. This was the same rifle that the main character had recently acquired, and he had not yet had the opportunity to try it out. The power of this rifle was enough to kill level 2 zombies with just a few shots, which was very beneficial for the main character. Taking the crystal out of the zombie, Ron remembered the girl he had saved and began looking for her nearby. It didn't take long to look for her, but her condition was not very good. Considering the force with which she was squeezed by that nasty tongue, she lost consciousness and was covered in vile mucus. The main character was struck by the idea that this mucus could be caustic, and it urgently needed to be washed off from the body of the young hunter. After wandering through the forest for some time, the guy found the river he was looking for and performed the necessary procedures. After some time, the girl began to come to her senses, which was undoubtedly a plus, but it was not clear how she would behave. After waking up, there was a swarm of conflicting thoughts and questions in her head. She remembered that she had lost consciousness and did not understand why she was still alive. At a certain moment, she realized that she was sleeping completely naked, and this made her bewildered and misunderstand what was happening. Noticing this, the main character was glad to see the rescued huntress in good health and decided to introduce himself to her. However, as was to be expected, the girl was not at all happy about this, but rather made her blush, given that she was completely naked next to an unfamiliar guy. Therefore, she threw a stone at him. Ron, realizing how it looked on her part, smiled awkwardly and caught the stone, explaining that he saved her and simply washed her away from the poison of that zombie. At this moment, the girl was not very worried about her salvation. She was more stressed by the thought that this guy had seen her naked body. The main character explained that he washed only the upper part. And even this information did not remove the embarrassment from the young hunter's face, since he still saw and touched. Ron offered a few potatoes as an apology, which he boiled while she slept, and this clearly angered her that her body was valued at only 2 potatoes. Having calmed down, the huntress decided to try this gift after all and was very surprised that potatoes could be so tasty. Seeing that she liked the taste of potatoes, the main character offered her ground salt, and this surprised the hunter even more than before. For the guy, her reaction was not entirely clear, and he asked what was the reason for such surprise, to which the girl replied that salt was very popular in the market. She also explained that salt was quite scarce and could only be obtained at the market, which made it no less valuable. Ron was very interested in this because in areas remote from seawater, getting salt was very problematic, which means this was another idea for a business. While he was lost in his thoughts, the huntress pulled him out of his thoughts by asking if he could sell her the remaining salt. At that moment, the main character came up with an interesting idea, and he offered to give away the remaining salt for free. The girl couldn't believe such generosity, and hesitantly asked if it was a joke, to which the guy replied that it was just a bag of salt. In the end, such a bag would cost tens of grams of gold in a store, and the main character gave it away completely free of charge, and this fact was alarming. While she was thinking about this, the guy asked if she wanted an endless supply of salt and food. Of course he wanted something in return. The girl was happy about this offer, but at some point she became sad and said that she did not have money or crystals to exchange. Then Ron confidently took her by the shoulder and told her that there were other ways to repay him without using any valuables. To this proposal, he received a lightning-fast refusal, accompanied by increased noise and a push in the chest, from which the main character was thrown back. The girl crossed her arms on her chest in a cross, as if covering her body, and loudly screamed that she could not sell her body since she had not yet been touched by anyone. This made the guy laugh very much, and after catching his breath, he said that he only needed her strength as an employee, and accordingly he would pay her for it. Once again, the misunderstood guy swayed smoothly in the arms of the young huntress, who did not like the ambiguity of the first sentence. In the end, she calmed down and, after thinking for a few seconds, said that she agreed to such conditions, but from her side only work and no other services. And it was in vain that she spoke so abruptly about other services, because the main character had already begun to try to imagine what it would look like from the outside. An image of this girl only in a bunny suit with ears popped into his head, and she asked him to do all sorts of indecent things with her. Since the fantasy was too sweet, he did not notice how the evil girl came close to him from behind. In one sharp movement, she grabbed him by the neck in a chokehold, asking with obvious anger what the main character was thinking about. When the hunter calmed down and put on her clothes, the main character noticed that there were only level 1 and 2 zombies near the settlement. It turned out that the hunter was very experienced in this matter and said that there are 9 different types of zombies in total, and in the vicinity of the settlement you can find a maximum of level 3. But the main character objected to this information and said that until that moment he had only been told about 8 types of zombies, without mentioning the 9th type. It turned out that the 9th level has an unusual property. Each individual can have a different level of strength, starting from the 1st and ending with a level above the 8th. Meanwhile, the main character and his companion approached a refugee camp, which repelled its visitors with a very unpleasant smell. The huntress explained this by saying that there are difficulties with water in the camp, and because of this, people rarely wash, stretching these periods to 2 weeks, to which the main character noted that she herself had last washed for a long time. This undoubtedly hurt the girl, and she began to make excuses that she often washes in the river. After this funny scene of justification, Ron said that it was just a joke and the huntress did not smell of anything, at which time some girl greeted them. In terms of her form, she was in no way inferior to the guy's companion, and from her the main character learned that his companion's name was Erica and introduced herself as Chloe, and this girl also asked to evaluate her new invention. Erica was not very happy about this new waste of energy, but the girl showed her a large control panel and said that now her computer could work 24 hours a day. It was clear from Erica's face that she was not very happy about her friend's invention, given that there was no internet left in the world. These words made Chloe very upset because she thought that she was inventing something useful to use. However, she quickly accepted her friend's point of view and agreed that her program did not compare to the value of food. The guy was interested in information about some program, and he offered to buy it for potatoes if, of course, Chloe agreed to this. This proposal was not thoughtless, since Ron noticed that despite the apocalypse, the technology of this world was more advanced and it was possible to make money on it. Chloe took out a flash drive and said that this program is called Evolution and it literally gives you the opportunity to evolve on your own. The explanations greatly fueled the protagonist's interest in this program, and he wanted to know for sure whether it was true. The girl was happy with this offer, but said that this program had not yet been finalized and it would take time, which she did not have, so she would have to become a zombie hunter. But the main character was determined and offered food and security so that she could find an assistant and finalize the program. Of course, this option suited Chloe, and she completely agreed, saying that if the main character did provide food, she would provide him with all the research results. Ron agreed without hesitation, since this program was very important to him, and he wanted to try it out as soon as possible. In turn, Chloe was very happy with this deal. Such a sweet dialogue offended Erica, and she was offended by saying that if she was provided with food, she too could find people to join the zombie hunter squad. The main character heard these complaints and said that he would also need a squad of hunters, and he would provide Erica with food and equipment. Erica's behavior changed a lot, and she was clearly happy with these words, even if she was not entirely sure of their honesty, to which the main character said that this was not a joke. As soon as she found out that this was not a joke, and Ron had actually offered such a deal, she rushed at him with obvious joy in her eyes. Having hugged him, Erica pressed tightly against his shoulder and it was sincere gratitude. A moment later, she ran away, saying that she would soon find people for the detachment and would not keep herself waiting long, and the guy stood in a stupor after the hug. After half an hour, Erica actually brought a considerable number of people for the detachment. They looked quite strong. The main character, of course, expected that she would bring a couple of onlookers with her, But no matter how many, he could not have predicted this. All that remained was to find out whether they were ordinary people or hunters. Erica said with full confidence that these are very good hunters, and their skills are at the proper level. Only they want to get some food first. Ron took out a bag of potatoes and offered it to the hunters, saying that he never lies and if they listen to him, they can make money. The hunters near the tree were skeptical and thought that the main character was too weak to be a leader. When suddenly a bullet flew between them and crashed into a tree, signaling to them that they were in danger. It was the main character who heard their conversation and brought it to their attention that if they try to rebel against him, then nothing good will end for them. After such a confident speech, the hunters were definitely happy to work for this guy, but they were even more happy about the thought of food, which was plentiful. Ron looked around at everyone present and realized that they had almost no equipment for carrying out raids, and offered to buy it. Meanwhile, the forest had its own special atmosphere and zombies wandered around, not afraid of absolutely anything. But in vain, since they were destroyed in the blink of an eye by precise shots from hunters. Ron's group advanced without any hindrance, and he himself did not have to do anything. Having taken the crystals out of the corpses, the main character said that the hunters should shoot in the head, since they were wasting ammunition. At that moment, a rather unpleasant-looking guy came out of the bushes. He was huge, and his belly was not inferior to his size. He shouted at the hunters to find out which gang they belonged to, since they had entered someone else's land. Apparently, he recognized Erica and was angry, since in the past she managed to steal something from them and apparently went unpunished. But she was not at all intimidated by his angry face and the tone with which he spoke, as she stood between two hunters with weapons at their advantage. From somewhere behind, the voices of several more people were heard who came to the aid of the fat man, and they were sure that the bunch of refugees was not dangerous for them. The main character did not like this, nor did he like the fact that a gun was pointed in his direction, but this did not interfere with his self-confidence. And at the moment of his speech, the main character took out his katana and made a vertical swing. His facial expression changed from friendly to very unwelcoming. This didn't scare the guy with the pistol one bit, because he was confident in his own abilities and in the pistol, which gave him an advantage over the katana. But he did not take into account that the distance could be quickly shortened, which the main character took advantage of and cut off his hand in which he was holding the pistol. A moment later, a heart-rending scream was heard over the forest, because the bandit realized that his hand was missing, and pain rushed to the severed place. Considering that this would be enough, the main character threatened the bandits and asked them to tell their boss that the refugee camp was now not in his power. The bandit without an arm was clearly not enough, and he began to claim that their boss was coping with the zombie mutants alone, and the main character would also die in vain. But quickly assessing the situation, he ordered to return to base, since they could not win this battle. And when they were about to leave, the main character called out to them. They definitely did not expect this, but they understood that this would not end well for them. Since the protagonist's advantage was undeniable, he was annoyed that they wanted to just leave after all those insults, and he ordered them to give up all the things they had. The guy without a hand began to be indignant that it was better to be killed than to be humiliated, expressing his obvious dissatisfaction with what was happening and saying that the main character was too cruel. And despite this, they didn't have much of a choice, so they had to come to terms with what was happening and obediently lay out all their things. But the main character was not satisfied with these meager belongings, since the bandits had been oppressing refugees for a long time, and this payment was too little, so they had to leave quickly. Although it was deep night outside, there was a light on at the base of the gang of hungry wolves. But the night was not too dark, since the moon was full. The bandit without an arm was kneeling in front of his boss, who was a huge man who vaguely resembled Indians. The bandit had a hard time because he brought bad news to his master. In response to the report, the boss called the refugees just dogs who depend on their master, and partly this could be called true. The giant approached his subordinate and put his hand on his shoulder, saying that they could not ignore this. However, the boss was clearly not happy that his subordinates lost without a fight, gave all their supplies to refugees, and believed that such garbage had no right to exist in their gang. It began to dawn on the bandit what his boss was talking about, and what he meant when he said what he meant when he said about existence. It scared him to the core, and he began to beg for mercy. But this did not save him. Only the shadow of a wolf on the wall mercilessly bit off the head of the one-armed bandit for his first and last mistake. The next day, The main character's group again ran into the fat man, and this time they were not going to let him go, wanting to take revenge for all his mockery. But this strong guy with a sword was not very afraid of refugees, considering that he was in the strongest gang, and only they could decide who became stronger and who did not. Ron didn't care at all what the name of this dangerous gang was, hungry wolves or dogs. It made absolutely no difference, and if they cooperate, then it would be good. But if not, then this would not end well. The fat man perceived the pistol raised in front of him as a serious threat and, deciding that the main character did not have the courage, showed where to shoot. And the shot sounded, from which the fat man was clearly frightened and jerked, losing his balance, but quickly realized that the target was not. He decided to look back. Behind him lay the corpse of a zombie with a broken skull, and the fat man was frightened by the thought that in the place of this almost headless zombie, it could be himself. As if reading his thoughts, the protagonist confirmed that if they did not cooperate, the fat man would be next. Realizing that there was no point in waiting for more, the bandit jumped up and ran away with all his might, managing to threaten, shamefully leaving the clearing. Since Ron was not a local at all, he had no idea what the danger of a gang of wolves was, which could not be said about Eric. She understood that the bandits were dangerous, and explained that due to a lack of resources, the gangs divided the territory, and they would not give it up so easily. Meanwhile, the fat man ran to his camp. He was truly scared by the main character, and wanted to find someone in the camp to help. But before this insidious thought had time to gain hope, he had to brake sharply. Since he had been away from the camp for only a short time, he could not quickly figure out what had happened here while he was away. All his partners lay dead, and they were killed not by a weapon or anything else, but most likely by someone very strong and capable, since he was able to kill an entire group of hunters. And this someone was already standing behind the fat man, who was not a small child at all, but clearly felt that the creature behind him was taller and larger than him. Turning around, he saw a huge zombie with equally huge teeth, whose entire appearance indicated that this was the third level. From the side where the fat man ran away, a deafening scream was heard, which echoed loudly across the clearing where the group of the main character was located. No one except Ron understood whose scream it was, but he guessed that it was the fat man and ordered to be on guard. A minute later, the same bandit jumped out to meet them, but he was without his sword and was so frightened that he ran very quickly. And the squad saw a not very pleasant picture, because they saw what was chasing the fat man. A huge hand was quickly approaching the bandit. Not even a second had passed before the bandit's head, which fit entirely into a huge hand, felt tension. A very large zombie took the fat man with both hands like a sandwich and began to slowly bring it to his open mouth. And when he bit off half of the bandit's body, the main character's group realized that this zombie was more dangerous than the second level. Panic gripped the hunters, who had never seen such large mutants. They clearly did not want to die and asked to run away rather than fight this monster. But Ron had already clearly decided that they would have to fight, because if they ran, this zombie would kill them one by one. And in order to avoid this, he gave the command to everyone to line up to strike. And as soon as the panic in his ranks subsided, having assessed the situation again, he gave the command to shoot, firing the first shot at this creature. The entire squad obediently opened fire, sparing no ammunition or their weapons, since the prospect of dying here did not please anyone. While the whole group was shooting at the enemy, the main character gave orders where and which group should shoot in order to immobilize this zombie. And this tactic bore fruit, as the monster stopped and tried in every possible way to shield himself from this hail of bullets with his hands. All the hunters began to feel that the weapon that their boss bought for them was very powerful and capable of stopping level 3 zombies. But at some point, the zombie stopped defending himself, opened up and began to scream furiously, emitting a red glow. Erica was the first to stop firing because she was more experienced than other hunters. She realized that it was not just like that, and now the zombie of the third level had mutated. And this did not bode well. The morning blue began to make its way into the tent where the main character was sleeping after a night of drinking. This made Ron sit up abruptly and realize that they had drunk a lot yesterday and had a very bad headache. And everything would be fine. But when he looked down, he saw someone's gentle hand that was on his groin. Turning his gaze, he saw Erica, who was sleeping peacefully next to him, and for some reason was naked, which was rather disconcerting. Ironically, she woke up at the same moment and, rubbing her sleepy eyes, did not immediately notice Ron sitting next to her. While she was recovering from a stormy evening, the main character decided to raise his voice, which Erica clearly did not expect. She was frightened at least by the fact that she was not sleeping alone, and turning around she saw the main character. The whole dream vanished, and she began to mercilessly bother Ron, trying to find out what he had done to her last night. But he, like her, did not remember anything. In the midst of the swearing, Chloe came into the tent to report that the program that the main character asked her for was already ready. By a strange coincidence, at this moment in time, everything looked as it did, and Chloe wondered if she had entered at the right time. Two young people jumped up and, like little children caught by their mother, began to make excuses that nothing had happened between them. Chloe knew this for sure, since she herself dragged their drunken bodies into this ward, since there were no other places. The only thing that was not clear to these two was that they slept without clothes, to which Chloe said that they both vomited and she had to undress them. Even though it was done with good intentions, Erica didn't like the fact that she slept in only her panties. The programmer handed the flash drive to the main character. On this flash drive there was a program that could attack someone else's computer, and even an idiot could use it. Ron didn't like being taken for a stupid person, but given the last few days, it was well deserved. Just like last night's drinking session. But he was clearly confident in his abilities, since he had experience in handling programs, and no difficulties should arise. In the company where the main character worked, everything was as usual. Small departments with employees who were doing their job. Ron was also one of these employees, but as usual, his boss came to him and dumped his job on him. When he left, this bastard was jubilant, because he had given an impossible task for the intern, and he was sure to make a mistake somewhere, and most likely he would not succeed at all. Suddenly, something very weighty and soft landed on the main character's head, for which there was only one explanation. It was someone's chest. It was Linda, who, having heard about an impossible task from her boss, decided to offer her help to solve the current situation. However, Ron was determined to do everything on his own, and Linda didn't need to know what he would do. She didn't object, and asked to call him if he needed anything. Now that he was alone, he took out the flash drive that Chloe had given him and decided to see how it worked. As soon as he inserted it into the computer, the program on the flash drive launched itself and was surprisingly simple but effective. The main character seemed to find himself in a space with many ticking lines that very quickly processed all the information in the office. One of the abilities of this program was the ability to watch someone through someone else's computer, and the main character immediately took advantage of this. Looking at his colleague through the monitor, he was able to guess that he was again watching some kind of vulgarity instead of doing his work. He also discovered that his boss was communicating with an employee of a competing company, and this alerted him, and also gave him the opportunity to take revenge for months of humiliation. As soon as the plan was ready, Ron, with particular cunning, hacked into his boss's computer and found irrefutable dirt on him. A few hours later, the boss announced that the intern was working overtime for the day, which meant several urgent tasks. The interns clearly did not like this course of events, since they were not paid for overtime work, but were performed as full-time work. The main character was tired of enduring this, and he asked the boss not to dump his work on others, but to do it himself, to which he received the expected answer about the lack of evidence. But the intern was ready for such a turn and threw a bunch of sheets of paper with incriminating evidence at the top, giving others the opportunity to look at it too. And the trainees, having seen the information on paper, were not very happy that they had to make game models from a competing company. In response to these objections, the boss began to yell that they were just interns and were useless to the company, but at least they were doing something. But to his surprise, he heard the voice of the company director, who wanted an explanation for what was happening and was clearly dissatisfied with the behavior of his deputy. In turn, the deputy tried to justify himself and insisted that he had done nothing of the kind, and that it was all an empty slander. However, it was clear from the director's face that he was not going to listen to these pathetic words, since the guilt of his deputy was obvious. The head of the company understood that a conflict with junior employees was inevitable and tried to smooth it over, promising that in the future there would be no such attitude towards them. But Ron was determined and said that he had already written a letter of resignation and no longer intended to remain in this company. Unexpectedly for everyone, the other interns also expressed a desire to quit, because they were also tired of such a disregarded attitude. In an instant, the department, which had about 6 young employees, was empty, and all this due to the negligent attitude of their boss. Naturally, the head could not be happy about this, given that they had taken a large order the day before, and now it would take much longer to complete it. Taking all this into account, he asked his deputy to write a letter of resignation. At this time, the main character definitely felt uncomfortable, because of him, many people voluntarily left the company, and he felt guilty for this. But his colleagues did not agree with him, since their desire was voluntary, and they had already endured all this for a long time. However, they were depressed as they now had to look for new jobs and some had families to feed. The main character had a plan for this, and he invited his colleagues to work for him in the future, since he plans to open his own business and will need help. The young people were very happy with this news, since there was no need to look for work, and their new boss was well known to them as a person. The next day, Ron went to another world again as he had a lot of plans. He thought that reselling goods from one world to another was a long and not as profitable occupation as he wanted, and now that he had some capital, he needed to create his own company. He was pulled out of his thoughts by the unexpected cry of the hunters, who were shouting to him about some problem. They quickly approached the camp on motorcycles and shouted as they went that Erica was in some kind of trouble and she urgently needed help. Since the main character did not understand what was being said, he asked the hunter to calm down and tell him everything again, only more clearly. The hunter said that during the purchase they were attacked by people from a gang of wolves, and Erica lured them into the jungle to save the others. Ron, without wasting any time, got on his motorcycle and said that he would save her personally and let the hunters gather people to help. He rode out, squeezing everything he could out of his vehicle, as he had not expected a band of wolves to attack the camp in his absence. At this time, the car was trying to break away from the chase at high speed because the prospect of stopping was not at all bright. The car was being chased by several motorcyclists who were serious and were sure that it would not be possible to hide from them on their own territory. Erica was driving the car, and she desperately tried to escape from pursuit, but she understood that it was unlikely to be possible to do this in such a bulky car. And her thoughts were quite material, since there were several motorcycles on the road ahead, which made it impossible to drive further. When she stopped, the leader of this group asked where she was in such a hurry and said that she would not be able to go further. The guy with the gun ordered the others to get the girl out of the car and bring her to him. But at that moment, something loudly thundered behind them, which pretty much frightened them and forced them to duck down. The bandits clearly did not understand what it was, and most importantly, why the engine of one of the motorcycles exploded. Suddenly, a teddy bear with a wick appeared on the head of one of them, but the bandit did not see it and thought that it was a simple toy, not knowing where it came from. The more experienced hunter quickly realized that this was not an ordinary soft toy, and the burning fuse on it was clearly not for beauty. And just as he was about to say this, the toy exploded, right in the face of another bandit, which definitely defied explanation. An attractive girl appeared from behind the trees, introducing herself as Nika, and she clearly didn't like the fact that such a bunch of men were offending a weak girl. Since she was clearly unhappy with this, she threw an unusual ball at the bandits after taking out the pin. As soon as the grenade hit the target, the main character turned around and realized that he would not be able to fight at full strength and would hurt the girls, so he needed to take the fight in the other direction. Nika was very pleased with such turns, since nothing remained of her enemy except a scrap. She was even more convinced that victory required a big howl. Erica jumped out of the car, immediately recognizing her friend, and was very glad to see her since she appeared very on time. It was noticeable that they had known each other for a long time, and Nika was also glad to see her friend, even if their meeting was a mere coincidence. Erica was glad to see them not only because she had not seen Nika for a long time, but also because of her salvation, since she would not have been able to escape from the bandits on her own. Nika did not feel the least bit like a savior, since Erica had saved her many times before awakening, and this rescue was a common gesture of friendship on her part. While they were joyfully communicating, a large figure stood in the shade of the trees, who was surprised to meet the awakened one. This figure turned out to be the head of a gang of wolves, and he wanted to test the strength of this girl, and at the same time deal with Erica. Suddenly, a burnt hand grabbed him by the leg. The owner of this mutilated limb turned out to be one of the bandits, who himself looked no less bad. He asked to be saved, which clearly angered his boss. Snatching his leg from the weakened grip, the gang leader began to mercilessly beat his subordinate on the head, which clearly could not leave him any chance of salvation. Having finished with this episode, the gang leader invited Nika to join his gang because he considered her promising and promised that she would become strong and famous. The girl agreed to this unexpected proposal without hesitation, confirming that the head of the gang of wolves is very strong. And not believing this, she threw several bombs in his direction at once to check whether these rumors were true. When the bombs reached the target, a very powerful explosion was heard, which left no chance of survival for anyone, and the girl was confident of her victory. But something was clearly wrong, because at the epicenter of the explosion, some kind of movement was clearly visible and it was getting closer. Suddenly, the leader burst out of the smoke and was clearly happy about the start of the fight, and what could not help but surprise, without a single scratch. The girl's long screams echoed throughout the area. Ronu listened to this scream and immediately realized that it was Erica's voice. But he was alarmed by the smell of burning in the surrounding area. He understood that it was impossible to hesitate and began to increase speed, trying to be in time to help his subordinate. After a short amount of time, he finally got to the place, and since the speed was clearly high, he had to sharply brake until he came to a complete stop. Before his eyes, there was an unpleasant picture in which a man he did not know stood in front of two girls who were already unconscious. Putting his foot on the head of the limp Erica, the leader of the gang of wolves waited for the appearance of the main character and did not immediately notice him. Seeing such disrespect on his part, Ron became very angry, since Erica was no longer the last place in his life. The head noticed this anger and was glad that he was able to bring the guy to such a state. But he was sure that he was weak and would not do anything. Without expecting further provocations, the main character, in a fit of anger, quickly shortened the distance and swung his hand to strike. The bandit leader did not expect such a turn, since Ron did not look unusually strong from the outside, but his speed said otherwise. The consequences of the blow to the face turned out to be bad for the leader, since the shockwave threw him into a tree, which he broke. The main character thought that this would be enough and rushed to Erica, trying to bring the girl to her senses and understand what her condition was. Erica was relatively fine and was even able to come to her senses, saying that she only missed 2 hits, which was enough for her. At this time, the thug was returning back, and he was very glad to meet a worthy opponent, since he had not met such a person for a long time. Now the giant was serious and was not going to underestimate his enemy, but at the same time he would not be very strong. Since the leader was confident only in his own strength and always decided everything by force, he decided to do the same this time. It was a discovery for Ron that a man of such a large build was just as fast and he had no opportunity to dodge, only to block. The head, in turn, was clearly confident in his strength and thought that a simple block would not save such a fragile body from damage. But the main character was intact. He received only minor damage, and he understood that he would not be able to fight such an enemy on equal terms and would have to use the help of the system. In order to cope with such an enemy, he will have to improve his combat skills, which in turn will improve his strength and agility. There was nothing else on the screen other than these abilities, which upset the main character, because this was all he had to build a business. After spending a lot of points on leveling up his skills, Ron felt an unusual surge of strength that he had never felt before. While he was doing this, the leader wasted no time and was already preparing to strike another crushing blow, and he was sure that this blow would be the last. Gathering all his strength, he struck straight at the target, but his fist stopped short of achieving its intended purpose. Realizing that his most powerful blow was stopped with only one hand, he was confused and did not understand how this was possible. The protagonist was pleased with his improved skills as he was now able to fight to his full potential. While holding the enemy's hand, he picked him up with his other hand and threw him powerfully over himself. It was definitely a martial arts technique, even though it was a throw. But since Ron's physical strength had increased, it was very strong. The leader clearly did not expect to face such force, and had already begun to understand that in pure physical strength, he was inferior to the main character. Ron was disappointed that the bandit was so weak and wanted to end the fight by striking his enemy in the face. The bandit, realizing that he had no chance of winning, used his only trump card and began to turn into a wolf. The transformation happened almost instantly, and the main character did not have time to react to it, and he was thrown back. Landing on his back and raising his head, he did not understand what had just happened, and what kind of creature was in the bandit's place. Instead of the leader of the bandits, a huge wolf stood before his eyes, saying that the main character could never compare with the strength of the awakened ones. Absolutely not understanding what was happening, the main character frantically tried to understand what it meant to awaken. The wolf brought some clarity to this issue, saying that only some people achieve strength exceeding human strength. But in order to achieve this, You need to absorb crystals from corpses. Shouting that the main character was weak in comparison with him, the wolf delivered a rather quick blow with his paw. This speed was enough for Ron to react late, and he ended up with several shallow wounds on his body. Now the wolf was completely confident in his advantage, and was going to return everything to the main character with a double blow. The main character turned around and realized that he would not be able to fight at full strength and would hurt the girls, so he needed to take the fight in the other direction. To achieve this goal, he began to tease the wolf, calling him a dog, and this had the desired effect. In a few jumps, the main character disappeared into the treetops, and the wolf was determined to catch up with him. This was what Ron wanted, so that the wolf would chase him and lose sight of him, which provided an opportunity for an attack. Although the wolf had lost his victim, he did not lose hope of finding her since he had heightened senses for this. At this time, the main character, realizing that he was not visible, decided to try a hidden attack, and taking out a katana, jumped on the wolf. But the wolf's reaction was faster than all his expectations, and he immediately turned towards the threat, even if he did not hear this attack. Grabbing the main character by the neck, he explained that his sense of smell is 10 times better than a human's, which gives him the ability to smell the victim, and now he will finish this fight. But the main character was sure otherwise, since he had already found a way to defeat this wolf. The next moment, the main character held his breath and took in as much air as possible. It was a mystery to the wolf what this guy was going to do. He could not expect an attack since the main character was immobilized. But this did not stop him, and he simply exhaled all the air in the wolf's face. Or rather, he did not exhale completely, but rather burped. This instantly disabled the wolf's nose, as it was too sensitive and the smell was very pungent. The main character knew in advance that all dogs hate the smell of onions, which he took advantage of. With his nose no longer working and his eyes watering, which reduced visibility to almost zero, the ox could only helplessly wave his paws in front of him. For the main character, this was an excellent opportunity to end this fight and deal the final blow. A swing of the katana, and the flow of such a powerful and formidable beast was cut from shoulder to hip, as if it were paper, but not alive. After the victory, the main character noticed some strange glow at the top of the monster, and since he did not know what it was, he decided to check. In the monster's chest was a crystal similar to the ones Ron took out from dead zombies, with the only difference being that this one was multicolored. This definitely surprised the main character, since he had never seen such a crystal in this world, and it was interesting to find out what it could do. When the guy took the crystal from the corpse and absorbed it, the system notified him that it was a crystal that increased the level, which led to him gaining new skills. One of these skills was a skill that allowed one to resurrect, heal, or control zombies, and the main character was glad to have such a useful skill. After receiving the boost, the system again issued an alert, which this time talked about a task in which the player must build a shelter within a certain time frame, or he will die. The punishment for failure to complete a task in the form of death seemed too cruel to the main character, and this frightened him greatly. Since the prospect of dying did not suit the main character, he decided that he needed to start completing the task and come up with some kind of plan. Half a day later, he returned to the camp to talk with Erica and Nika about future plans, since they could help him with this. Nika introduced herself to Ron and said that she had been a hunter since Erica saved her 3 years ago. From an external perspective, she seemed very young to the main character, so he was very surprised that she became a huntress so early. Erica explained that Nika is an unusual hunter and should not be underestimated since she was an awakened one, but the main character still hasn't figured out what that meant. Nika explained that after infection, some people do not become zombies, but rather gain superpowers due to a crystal that is activated in their head, which is why they are called awakened. She also explained that her ability is to produce explosives from any object she touches. As she spoke, she was holding a cup in her hands, which suddenly began to glow, and Nika threw it towards the exit from the tent. As soon as the cup left the tent and fell on the floor, an explosion occurred, which was extremely surprising and could not be explained. The main character thought this ability was very cool and concluded that the awakened are invincible. But as Erica explained, this was not so, since the awakened ones, like zombies, were divided into 9 levels, and Nika belongs to the 3rd, and that wolf was of the 4th level. Nika was very surprised by the strength of the main character, since he was able to single-handedly defeat the awakened 4th level and offered to join his group. This proposal suited Ron because he was confident in his abilities, even if they were not enough. but they would always have enough food. After some time, the inhabitants of the camp came to the main character and thanked him for his help, but he thought that they wanted to take revenge on the wolves. But one of the men said that they were just farmers, and the leader of the wolves wanted to seize their territory, including them, but the guy saved them. For the main character, this was good news, and he suggested that they return to their work and not waste time. However, the people said that their farm was still under the control of the gang, since after the death of a leader, a new one is simply chosen, and they offered Ron to become their leader, and they would only take food as payment. The main character was unable to miss such an offer because he remembered the task for which he needed to create a shelter, and this was a good opportunity. While he was in his thoughts, the girls firmly decided that they would smash the entire lair of wolves into smithereens, since everyone was pretty tired of them. Meanwhile, power was being shared on the farm, and the fighters fought each other for the right to be the leader of the gang. Suddenly, they heard an unfamiliar voice, which made them turn away from their battle and look at the person speaking. And it was none other than the protagonist, who was excited at the prospect of gaining leadership through sheer brute force. Since he came here just for a fight, he decided not to delay, but to act, and abruptly rushed to the top. A moment later, he was already sitting above the two strongest fighters and pressed their heads to the ground, clearly understanding that they were clearly no match for him. The girls decided to keep up with their leader, and they also came here to take revenge. So Nika began throwing grenades towards the crowd. Explosions began to thunder throughout the area, which led those around them to panic. Since they immediately recognized this girl, the entire crowd began to scatter. At the same time, on the other side, farmers came who had long wanted to get even with this gang, and they rushed to attack. Half an hour later, the area was littered with defeated gang members, and no one managed to get out. After this massacre was completed, the protagonist told the farmers that the farm would now belong to them, since it was theirs by right. But this prospect did not greatly suit the farmers, since there could be other gangs nearby, which meant that they could be attacked again, so they offered the main character to become the owner of these lands. Ron liked this, even embarrassed him a little, and he promised that now the residents would be able to live in peace and they would have food and weapons for protection. As soon as the leader accepted his authority, the farmers began to cry out joyful exclamations, since they were more satisfied with this leader than the previous one. But making such a responsible decision did not pass without a trace for Ron. The system immediately responded and made adjustments to the program. Now the farm belonged to him, and the system indicated this on the screen, showing its characteristics, and it also said that any of the points could be upgraded with the help of points. After a short analysis, the main character came to the conclusion that he would still have enough crystals from corpses and gold, since even to protect the farm, he would have to invest these resources in the system. While Ron realized that he was still poor, Chloe came and said that they had found the Wolfgang safe, and realizing that there might be something interesting in it, the main character wanted to look at it. It was not a difficult task for Chloe to open this safe, since she had the necessary skills and simply found the combination. Considering the size of the safe, the main character assumed that there was quite a lot of interesting stuff in it, maybe even valuables. When the doors of the safe opened, there was a huge pile of corpse crystals, and they were different, and not only of the first level. The young people were very surprised to see this mountain of crystals, but Chloe was only thinking about buying potatoes. She also concluded that even such a number of crystals does not provide them with labor, which means that if someone wants to take these crystals, it will not be easy for the main character. But Ron already had an idea about solving this problem, since he had been thinking about doing something similar for a long time. But he did not have the appropriate skill. He went out into the street to the bodies of the killed members of the Wolfgang, which had already been carefully laid out in front of him. The main character decided to test his new skill and used it on these 3 corpses, and the system issued a notification about this procedure. After studying the system notification, the main character extended his hand to use the skill, and some kind of blue energy came out of it. It very quickly enveloped the bodies of the dead. It was like some kind of liquid that enveloped the dead bodies over their entire area. For the first second, nothing happened. But after that, the body began to move its limbs little by little, and then they began to rise completely. Since no one knew about the new abilities of the main character, Nika was frightened by the unexpected resurrection of corpses. But Erica, not the least bit confused, immediately picked up a pistol and prepared to shoot the living dead. The main character noticed this, and grabbing Erica's pistol with his hand, explained to her that these were not zombies, but only his resurrected dolls. But Erica did not quite understand how this was. For the main character, this was an opportunity to test his skill, and he told her that after defeating the wolf, he received such an interesting skill. Of course, since these corpses were just puppets, he could freely control them, and they could become free labor, such as cutting down trees. The zombies actually cut down the tree, and did it normally for a while, but at some point one zombie cut off the head of the second as he was standing in front of the impact path. To Erica, it seemed that these corpses would not be very useful, considering how stupid they were. And Ron also understood that managing one was already difficult, but several were even more so. At that moment, the satisfied voice of Chloe was heard, who said that she had already made a similar device that should help them. The main character became interested in this and found in his hand something similar to augmented reality glasses, or so it seemed. Having realized that they needed to be put on his head and having done this, the main character was left with the question of how to use this device. Chloe pulled out what looked like SIM cards from her pocket and explained that they were chips, one of which could receive brainwaves and the other send. Since one of the chips was important for brain activity, it had to be inserted into the helmet, and the other naturally had to be inserted into the brain of the controlled subject, in this case, a zombie. The most interesting thing was that it was controlled remotely, and it seemed that the owner himself was inside a zombie. Deciding to test his new body, Ron decided to touch Erica's thigh to get more information about this process of transferring consciousness. Having done this, the main character was surprised at how cool this invention was, since he clearly saw and felt everything. The only thing he didn't take into account was Erica's reaction to such a sudden harassment, for which he received a kick right in the face. But even this oversight made it clear that consciousness is not only inside the zombie body, but also fully feels pain and other tactile sensations. And that was cool. Having understood how it all worked, the guy came up with one brilliant idea, in the implementation of which he needed the help of the girls. They, naturally, did not understand what the head wanted from them, and were puzzled by the unexpected appearance of some kind of plan. After a while, the zombies' heads flew apart from the pistol shots as if they were plush. Erica did all this because it was part of the main character's plan. He had to resurrect several zombies and attack her. This was a brilliant idea from a filming point of view. Since the zombies and weapons were real, the battle looked great. However, neither Erica nor even Chloe understood why Ron needed these notes, and the only thing that could be found out was that these were some kind of preparations. After all this, in the real world, all he had to do was edit the resulting video and upload it to the internet. As a result, he created a fairly realistic trailer for the game and posted it on the portal. It was a kind of advertising to attract an audience. The night flew by unnoticed by the protagonist, and morning had already arrived, as evidenced by the rays of dawn in the windows. Waking up, Ron realized that he had fallen asleep right at the table. He was so exhausted by this activity. Despite the fact that he had just woken up, he was in the most lethargic state and really wanted to sleep, as evidenced by a strong yawn. But he still had to wake up, and he decided to check how things were going at his trailer. He had all sorts of hopes for it, and he wanted at least someone to appreciate him. But what he saw on the screen of his laptop surprised him very much, because he could not have expected this. On the screen, Chloe was seen sitting, surrounded by a crowd of zombies, and an inscription in which the player was urged to save the sweet girl from danger. Several young people sat in front of the monitor, having had a lot of fun participating in the beta test of such a realistic game. There was a young girl sitting in the office on the floor who was also interested in this game, but her people could not find the publisher of this game. This girl turned out to be the head of a large company, and she ordered all employees to leave comments under the video to gain access to the closed beta test. Apparently, this girl was a business shark and understood that if the game turned out to be the same as in the trailer, it would be a huge success. The young man sat and reloaded his pistol, clearly preparing it for a combat situation. It was a retired Special Forces soldier named Rex, and since he understood weapons like no other, he doubted that this was a game since everything in it was too real. A package arrived for a girl named Mia that she had been waiting for a long time. She eagerly received it. Her room was in absolute order. Camera, microphone, lighting, in general, everything for good streaming. Mia was a famous streamer with over 5 million fans, and she wanted to show people the quality of this game. On the farm in the world of the apocalypse, silence and calm reigned, and it seemed that this was the most ordinary world, in which there was none of the horror that Ron had seen. At this time, the main character was creating zombie corpses so that players could be transported into them, and at the moment he was making a body for Mia. The main character looked at Mia's photo and realized that her game body was exactly the same as her real one, so this simplified some tasks. One of these tasks was to create 50 player models for their successful entry into this game. For Erica, it was absolutely not clear why the main character created each corpse with a different face, since the troops were used for filming with the same faces. At some point, she thought that this was the main character's fetish, to which he replied that it was not so, and she would soon see everything. Of course, he didn't want to reveal the true reasons for these actions, since Eric wouldn't understand half of what he said. And even if he did understand, it wouldn't end well for him. Creating faces similar to the original was not difficult, since the main character knew in advance what the players who registered for the beta test looked like. Chloe was a kind of administrator on the server and checked the functionality of her devices and chips, but she was surprised that the main character found 50 people. But this was no longer important, since all the helmets had been sent to the players, and the servers would be launched soon. It remained to find out whether they would be able to enter the game. Chloe typed something into her laptop and announced that the brainwave controller was up and players would now be able to connect to zombie bodies. Erica did not understand these devices, so she thought it was all a joke, since the bodies had not moved for quite a long time. Suddenly, Mia's body, which was standing next to Erica, opened her eyes, which was too abrupt for her. Mia was crazy with joy, because she didn't believe until recently that such a game could exist, and now she herself is here, in the same location as in the trailer. Erica was very surprised by the unexpected awakening of one of the zombies, and also by the fact that she was very energetic. At that moment, Mia ran up to Erica and began to touch her breasts, surprised at the reality of the sensations. Naturally, if you touch Erica without her consent, then be prepared to get hit in the face, which is what happened. And this did not upset Mia one bit, since she felt pain, which was an even greater surprise for the game, and she was completely sure that this was some other world. The rest of the players also connected to their bodies and began to stretch their limbs, wondering how real everything was here. One of the corpses turned out to be a girl named Jill, the same owner of a large company who managed to get into the closed beta test, and she understood that she was not mistaken. Another player turned out to be the Special Forces soldier Rex, who was the only one who noticed the difference between his flexible and agile body and the clumsy game one. After all the players entered the game, the main character attracted their attention by coughing into his hand several times. Usually this is enough. When everyone calmed down and turned their attention to Ron, he greeted the new players and said that they were in the wildness shelter, and that now they would begin a new life. After a short greeting, the main character began to explain some of the rules in this game. One of them was death, after which the character will have to be remade ourselves. While he was saying this, Mia came up to him in the paid room and she was surprised by the reality of the non-player character. Ron didn't immediately understand why she came up to him tightly and sweetly and smiled carefreely, which made him a little uncomfortable. And this discomfort was completely justified, since the girl had a knife behind her back, which she was definitely going to use. And at the same moment, she took out her hand with a knife and tried to hit the main character, thus testing the game for complete freedom of action. And it seemed to her that she would succeed, when suddenly there was a pop and a small hole appeared right in the middle of her skull, which clearly discouraged her. The force of the shot threw her back, after which her body began to shatter into small particles. At this time, the main character stood with a raised pistol at the ready and quite seriously emphasized the importance of the rule of death and asked the players not to die just like that. For the rest of the players, it was a surprise that after death your account would be deleted and you would have to create a new one. They thought it was too cruel. Behind them appeared a joyful Mia, who was already able to resurrect, and, according to her, the feeling of death here is no less real than the others. The main character continued to explain the rules that players are prohibited from harming or killing NPCs, since they, unlike players, will not be able to resurrect. And also non-player characters do not have an indicator like players. He also explained that you can make sure that there is a non-player character in front of you using the observation command. Rex decided to immediately clarify that if they cannot kill NPCs in the camp, then outside the camp they can do whatever they want, which received Ron's approval. Jill was also interested in how to increase strength and equipment in this game, since she did not want to lose her equipment without return. To this, the main character explained that they need to kill zombies, from which they will receive corpse crystals, and for these crystals they will be able to get equipment and increase attributes. He also said that completing tasks for non-player characters will increase their sympathy for the player, and will also increase the reputation of the shelter, which can also be exchanged for points. Also, one of the options for players was the command system, after using which they could view information about their character. Having used this command, Jill saw the status in front of her and had absolutely no understanding of how it worked and what kind of technology it was. At this point, the brief briefing was over, and the head of the shelter wished the players to enjoy life in this world and fired a pistol, making it clear that the game had begun. The players immediately scattered around the territory. Whoever wanted to go where they wanted. Mia went into the forest to hunt, and several more people followed her who recognized her. It turned out that they were her fans. It was impossible to call Mia modest, because she was very self-confident and considered herself a game master, and the others believed in it. They soon came across a small group of zombies who immediately noticed the guests and were ready to attack. Mia took out a knife and was determined to destroy these zombies. Again, she thought that everything would be easy. But 3 minutes later, she was convinced of the opposite. The zombies in this game were not ordinary weaklings. Realizing that she would be of no use in battle for now, she asked the main character if there were any missions in this game that did not require combat skills. To which she received an ominous answer that if they do not want to fight, then they can easily do farm work, such as tending the beds, digging up the garden, and more. Since Mia had no choice, she agreed to the task of plowing the land. But she did not feel as if she had become a slave. After a while, Ron enjoyed the sight of the players working and praised himself for such an idea. From behind came the voice of a man who wanted to purchase some equipment. It was the same Special Forces soldier named Rex. In his hands, there was a mountain of crystals, and he wanted to exchange them for weapons. The main character could not understand where this man got such a number of corpse crystals, to which he received an unexpected answer that it was extremely easy to find and kill zombies. But he needed weapons to increase his effectiveness. The main character, without hesitation, gave him a pistol as a reward and waited for even greater success in exterminating zombies. As soon as the man received the gun, he immediately began to examine it and quickly concluded that it was a Browning 1911, which was absolutely true. Realizing that a pistol was not enough for this man, the main character said that in the future the rewards would be much better. When the player left, the main character thought that the player's power might be useful in the future. Before he had time to move away from the previous dialogue, a woman's voice was heard behind him, calling him, and the guy thought that something had already happened. This woman was Jill. She also wanted to try hunting zombies, but initially have equipment and weapons, to which she was told that all this could be obtained for crystals by the troop. But she said that she did not have anything like that. Then it was not clear to Ron how she wanted to get crystals for equipment. Then Jill said that she could enroll in the game as much as she needed, since all games are made to make money. Ron replied that this game does not have the enrollment function and all players are initially in an equal position. But he took note of this method of earning money. This definitely made Jill angry, and she stated that money was all she had and she could easily buy the game. Then, in order to stop this, the main character came close to her, lightly touched her chin, and said that the status of the real world does not mean anything here. And if Jill does not stop, he will punish her. However, Jill was too stubborn and already realized that if she couldn't enroll in the usual way, she would find another one. She received approval for this proposal, since the game was absolutely free and did not limit her as long as she followed the rules. Then Jill resorted to an unusual plan. She offered other players money for crystals, and she would pay the money in the real world. Everyone liked this offer, and a large number of players already offered her their crystals. The main character looked at this approvingly, because if you have money for such a trick, then you can very well use it. Now the deal took place differently, since Jill brought a large amount of crystals and Ron had no reason to refuse her. During this time, other players handed in tasks to Erica, such as chopping wood or cultivating land. For her, such attention was still unusual, so it caused some discomfort and she had to smile tightly. After she accepted the quests, the players were given a reward in the form of points, and they were happy because they could exchange them for tools or anything else. They were very grateful to Erica and demanded even more tasks from her, to which she sent them to repair the house and collect medicinal ingredients. She had absolutely no idea what was wrong with these people or why they wanted to work so badly, but she liked the fact that she didn't work full-time. A few days later, a meeting of the shelter took place, in which the main character, Nika, Erica, and Chloe were present. Things were going pretty well for the farm and the refugees, and this was largely thanks to the corpse dolls who worked for next to nothing. Erica emphasized that these dolls are always energetic and full of energy, as if they like to work forever. The main character said that very little time would pass, and the territory would need to be expanded, and at this point their meeting could be considered closed. But Chloe asked the main character to stay behind because she had several questions for the leader. Erica began to tease her that she wanted to confess her feelings to Ron, but the main character asked her to go first and remained in the room. He didn't know what Chloe wanted to ask, but he suggested that she not be shy and ask if she had questions. Chloe suddenly became serious, which she rarely did, and asked the question that interested her: who really controls the dolls? This greatly puzzled the main character because he knew that Chloe was a smart girl, but that was putting it mildly. He couldn't tell the truth, and he decided to lie that these were high-ranking people from other settlements who had nothing to do. Chloe found this strange, and she asked another question in which she wanted to know how it turned out that these people came to the main character. Realizing that there was no point in lying further, Ron put his hands on Chloe's shoulders and said that everything he does is all for their sake. And the revelation worked, as Chloe immediately agreed to help in any matter. Erica suddenly ran in shouting that something was definitely happening on the street, and most likely something important. At this time, the guy accused Mia of stealing his crystals, and for this, she entered his house. It was completely natural for Mia to steal from this guy since she knew he was a non-player character. At this point, the head came and asked what was going on, and what kind of division did these two arrange between themselves. The guy respected the head of the settlement and immediately turned to him because he wanted to restore justice and punish this thief. But Mia believed that this did not violate the rules of the game, since there was complete freedom of action, which means theft was allowed. This greatly angered the man, as she took not only the crystals, but also body armor, weapons, and even underwear. For the main character, it was a difficult choice of what to do, because Mia is a well-known streamer and can greatly help in promoting the game. After thinking a little, he said that theft is allowed, but he suggested that they find out everything with their fists, and if she wins, then she is right, and if not, then she will return everything in double amount. As soon as such a proposal was made, these two were already ready to snitch on each other, so they immediately accepted it. Mia took a fighting stance and asked her not to underestimate her, because she practiced many types of martial arts. But this definitely didn't help her as she missed the first blow to the face and fell to the ground. As soon as she fell, the man was not going to stop and decided to shake the soul out of her so that she would never steal again. The main character understood that the outcome of this battle was determined in advance, since people from his world were significantly weaker than these embroiderers. At the end of the fight, Mia admitted her guilt and returned everything stolen to the rightful owner. Ron said that in the future this will become the rule, and if any controversial issues arise, then resolve them in the language of force. A group of guys were sitting in an internet cafe, and she was surprised by the high ratings of the game, especially from Mia, from whom getting a good rating was not an easy task. Mia was sitting at home at the computer and communicating with her subscribers, very tired from playing for a long time. She drank beer and was glad that her subscribers calmed down and went to eat, but they still had to go online again. Suddenly, Mia noticed that the beer was gone and so was the food, so she invited the audience to go to the store to buy something. So she found herself in a store that was quite impressive in size, and its shelves were bursting with the number of goods. She went to the right shelf and started looking to see if her favorite brand was sold out, and she was lucky because there was another can on the shelf. At the moment when she reached out and took it, her hand was blocked by a man's hand. Turning around, she saw a young guy who kindly invited her to take this jar for herself, if she wanted, of course. She was happy with this offer, but it began to seem to her that she had seen this guy somewhere. And at one moment, information from memory reached these two, and they recognized each other. Mia and the head of the shelter met in the real world. After a while, the two raised their beer bottles because they were glad to have such a meeting. Mia and Ron were sitting in the room. After such a coincidence, they decided to go visit Mia and have a little drink. Now she knew that the guy was not an NPC, but a very real person, to which he said that this was all for the sake of improving the gameplay. The girl, as usual, behaved relaxed, and even though in the game she was afraid of the leader, in real life she did not hesitate to call him ordinary and not very handsome. To this, the guy said that he could not expect that such a popular girl could have a completely ordinary life, because he thought that there was no end to the fans. And this perhaps was his main mistake, since he now found himself in her house, and also revealed his identity to the most inconvenient person. In response to the guy's assumptions, she said that she is not a news anchor, but quite a gamer. and fans do not love her for her body and appearance. However, the main character had a different opinion on this matter and said that her body is actually very beautiful, as is her appearance. This greatly embarrassed the girl, and she looked away a little, but then looked at the guy and said that even if he said that, she would not be happy about it. The main character, of course, thought outside the box and thought not only about its beauty, but also how it could be used to promote the game. But this was all secondary. In fact, he was interested in her opinion about the game, from the point of view of an experienced player, and maybe she had some ideas for the game. Mia had several suggestions for this, so she suggested introducing a dungeon system to diversify the content, and also advised the main character to change his appearance to the game one as a player. The main character liked these ideas, and out of joy he hugged the girl very sincerely, which she clearly did not expect. At this point, the main character decided to say goodbye to her and said that he would immediately return to the game and make changes to improve it. The door slammed, and the girl was left alone with her thoughts. It was just as important to her that he listened to her, but it was also a shame that he did not ask what her name was, because her nickname in the game was her real name. The other world, as always, lived its own life. Although it was apocalyptic, the sun shone as beautifully as the real one, and the nature and forest were no worse. As it turned out, the system was able to create objects inside this world, which is what Ron needed, and he created a first-level dungeon, spending 500 points. After confirming this command, an image similar to a galaxy appeared on the screen, but this was the process of generating a dungeon. After some time, a portal similar to that image appeared in front of the main character. This was the dungeon. There was also an inscription above the portal that gave information about this dungeon. The main character stood in front of the portal and hoped that this was not a waste of points, because if so, then it would be a big loss. After some time, he spoke to the players on behalf of the head of the settlement and informed the players that the game now has a dungeon system in which they can earn something interesting. This was great news for players as they were already starting to miss the regular theme of dungeons, and now they had the opportunity to clear them. Meanwhile, the main character hid behind a stone and watched the players' reactions. He began to understand Mia's words, because on behalf of the NPC, it is difficult for him to notice the player's dissatisfaction, and he decided that he would not be an NPC. At that moment, his body began to change and lose its shape. This is how the appearance editor worked in this world. In an instant, he transformed into a completely different person, which was another amazing skill of the system. Now, he had long silver hair and a different appearance, which allowed him to pretend to be a player and look at the game from a different perspective. Mia was already gathering a group of people who wanted to go to the dungeon, since going in a group was more appropriate. Someone's hand fell on her shoulder and she looked around. She was asked about the opportunity to join her group. When she turned to the speaker, she saw a guy with long silver hair repeating the question about joining the team. Having looked at the guy better, the girl just beamed from his beauty, since she looked strange. The guy asked if she was all right. This question made the girl wonder if they had seen each other before, because she had already heard it from someone. Ron realized that he was close to failure, and he had to lie. Most likely, they had seen each other for a long time, and he had to change the topic to the dungeon. Since he was very attractive, Mia could not refuse him. As soon as they united, she approached them and asked if this was so. In front of them stood two young guys who wanted to join them. They also offered to split the loot from the dungeon equally, which was a fair offer. Mia again became arrogant and pointedly made a smart appearance to show off and asked the main character if he agreed, to which she received an affirmative answer. She was full of passion, and as soon as the team was formed, she suggested not to waste time and set out to conquer the dungeon. Ron was glad that she was a little dumb and didn't recognize him. There shouldn't be any problem since this was the easiest dungeon. People gathered in front of the portal to the dungeon. Many of them had already been there. They were waiting for their turn for the next attempt. Those who had already been there said that it was very difficult, and it was most likely a matter of their equipment or level, which was not far from the truth. Mia walked into this crowd. She attracted everyone's attention and announced that the first team to complete the dungeon would be hers. At that moment, Rex came out of the dungeon looking very rumpled. A notification appeared above the portal that he had successfully cleared the zombie forest from the dungeon. This was very bad timing for the girl, because after such a strong speech, she immediately screwed up. Since they could no longer be the first, she quickly changed the goal, saying that the main thing in this game is to survive, and the rest is secondary. The main character stopped Rex by taking him by the shoulder. He, in turn, did not understand why the stranger's attention fell on him. The reason for the interest was simple. The guy simply gave him a bottle of liquid, which was something like a first aid kit in this world. Rex was surprised by such kindness, because from the very beginning of the game, there was no sign of friendliness from the players, so he said that he would not forget this help. But this gesture of kindness did not please Phil, a new member of the squad. He did not approve of such help, since the supplies can be kept for yourself, and there is no need to give them to a stranger, to which he received the answer, "Mind your own business." This answer angered the hell out of him, and he was about to give Ron a beating, but his comrade named Tim calmed him down. After the conflict was resolved, Mia began to open the passage to the dungeon. The transition was also unusual. All group members were enveloped in light, and a glow appeared under their feet. The system notified that they would move to the dungeon in 3 seconds. After the countdown, they found themselves in a very dense forest, reminiscent of a jungle, and the system also informed them that they had 60 minutes to complete the dungeon, and the main goal was the boss. Mia was amazed by what she saw, as the terrain was radically different from the terrain in the camp, and she was glad that the creator of the game listened to her advice. The main character decided to once again avert suspicion from himself and asked if she knew the creator of the game, to which the girl turned up her nose and joyfully declared that it was she who taught him everything. At that moment, Phil noticed something very strange, as his face showed more despair than fear, and he pointed it out, asking the others to take a look too. What he was pointing at were snakes. There were a lot of snakes, even too many, and this made everyone wary. The animals did not wait long and attacked in all their numbers at once, rushing toward the new visitors. The fact that they were snakes was a small problem, since Mia hated them and was very afraid of them. Ron cut through these weak monsters without any problem or effort. He commanded everyone to be careful. And it was necessary to be careful for a reason, because he knew that these snakes were poisonous, and he also suggested how to fight them. Although there were many snakes, there were not enough of them to cause serious harm, and the hunters, following the advice, calmly fought off the attack. The only one who was uneasy was Mia, since she thought snakes were very scary, and she grabbed one of them in the middle with her bare hands. She ended up tearing it in half, having no bladed weapon and being very angry about the whole situation. Throwing away the remains of the snake, she declared that it was all very terrible. But the guys who witnessed this cruel scene were sure that she herself was really terrible. Suddenly, Phil's scream was heard and there was horror on his face. He again noticed something that the others could not notice. Everyone was wondering what happened. He, turning very pale and covered in cold sweat, showed his hand, which had 2 small holes, and said that he had been bitten. He fell to his knees and begged the others to leave him and move on, blood oozing from his hand and his health gradually declining. The main character reassured him by saying that this snake is not so poisonous, so there is no need to worry. You just need to suck out the toxins. After hope was found, Tim offered him his help and said that although they had not known each other for long, they were now like brothers. The subsequent spectacle looked more like something obscene. Tim began to suck the poison out of his comrade's shoulder, and for some reason he blurred like a girl. Ron and Mia were very happy to see this scene. It was evident from their faces, especially from the blood that poured from their eyes. The girl invited the main character to go away with her. The guy had no reason to refuse, because this was better than watching brotherly love. When they left, the main character asked what she wanted to tell him, which she couldn't say in front of everyone. She pointed to the health bar, which was gradually decreasing, and said that she was also bitten by a snake. It was unexpected, and the main character immediately offered to get rid of the poison, since she had no more than 5 minutes left. But contrary to all expectations, the place where this slender and beautiful girl was bitten turned out to be her breasts, which was not surprising given her size. After the place was determined, the main character began to give up the back a little because this was not part of his plans, but the girl insisted on it, citing that it was just a game. And since the guy had no other choice, he agreed and pressed the girl to a tree, embarrassing her very much. And what a surprise the girl was when the guy began to suck the poison out of her chest, since the sensations from these actions were quite real. The main character liked this procedure, and he jokingly said that he thanks her for the treat, to which the girl blushed and said not to tell anyone about it because she would lose her status. At this time, Tim finished extracting the poison from his comrade, and he was very glad that now he was not in danger. She also said that he could ask him for anything. Tim responded to this gratitude with acceptance, but there was a small problem. because he was also bitten, and now he needed the help of a comrade. Phil, without the slightest hesitation, said that he would help his brother and suck out the poison because that's what real comrades do, and he greatly regretted it, because his friend turned his back to him and began to pull down his pants, saying that his back was defenseless. At this time, the main character and Maya came out of the forest, who were about to move on if the brothers had finished with the poison, and were again dumbfounded when they saw a new picture. Tim was lying on the ground with his pants down, and Phil was sitting behind him, extracting poison from his friend's buttock. But since it looked very suspicious, they immediately began to make excuses. But it was too late. With 49 minutes left to complete the dungeon, the group moved to a new location and a swamp appeared there. Mia didn't understand why the dungeon was called a zombie forest. Since the entire time they were inside, they didn't meet a single zombie. Phil reassured her by saying that even if zombies appeared, she had nothing to worry about, because they would protect her. To which the girl grimaced her face and said that she was not eager to be protected by lovers of feces, and the guy began to yell that he did not eat them. Suddenly, from the swamp they were passing by, a sound was heard that was not like the kind that a swamp should make. Suddenly, behind Phil, a monster jumped out of the swamp. They had never seen such an enemy, and they were not ready for such a sharp attack. The monster jumped on his back and bit him on the head, and a notice appeared above his head that this monster is called a swamp zombie, and it is very good at camouflaging itself to attack. The main character reacted instantly and immediately drew his sword and rushed to attack, asking his comrade to duck down. His goal was the monster's head, but everything was complicated by the fact that it was very close to the man's head. But the guy was able to direct the blade correctly and his hand did not waver. Having carried out a horizontal swing, he was able to hit the monster on the head, and it was a centimeter from his comrade's head. Since the swamp zombies were not particularly strong, the body of these zombies was not very strong, so part of the monster's head was easily separated from the body. The monster fell to the floor, already dead, and Phil admired the accuracy of the protagonist's blow because it was very dangerous. But the main character was not very happy because he still missed a little and hit Phil's head, from which blood began to fly out like a fountain. But Mia tore them away from the dialogue and asked them not to be distracted and look towards the swamp. The heads of monsters began to appear from the thick of the swamp, who were no longer trying to hide, but rather wanted to attack people, and there were quite a lot of them there. The main character wanted to deal with the zombies on his own because they were only level 1, but he understood that if this continued, the players would not be able to practice. The appearance of such a bunch of enemies did not bother Phil one bit, but on the contrary aroused anger for his damaged bald head, and now he could throw it out. The first thing he did was get rid of his t-shirt by ripping it off himself. This was in preparation for a technique called muscle strengthening. In an instant, his body became 3 times larger, and it could not be said that he became larger due to weight or fat. He was enlarged by muscles that were clearly visible. The main character was very surprised by this. Tim explained that this was Phil's ability, and since in real life he is a fitness trainer, he quickly mastered it in the game. The zombies decided not to delay and attack the man, who was now a priority target for them because he was larger. But such an attack only once again angered Phil, and he began to tense his whole body with anger. The next moment there was an impact, and his axe cut off the heads of 2 zombies at once without visible effort. The main character was amazed by the player's unexpected power, and was very happy that real-life abilities were taken into account in the game. Having chopped up a few more zombies, Phil not only did not calm down, but on the contrary, he became even more furious, and he expected new rivals, and suddenly his body was consumed by smoke. There was a complete feeling that it was a smoke bomb, but something still didn't add up. When the smoke cleared, in the place of the menacing muscular man stood dead and exhausted Phil, who himself did not understand what had happened. Mia wanted to know what happened, and Tim explained that since Phil has a low level, he can only maintain this ability for a little while and then weakens. This was a collapse of the protagonist's logic, because since it was true, it was not worth using it so thoughtlessly, especially on ordinary opponents. While he was perplexed, he received a notification from the system about an additional task, which offered to destroy 10 enemies with 1 blow in exchange for the muscle-strengthening skill. 10 enemies emerged from the swamp as if to order, which was ideal for completing this task, since this was not a problem for the main character. While he fought, he advised others to climb trees so they wouldn't get hurt. For the partners, This was somehow doubtful, since they thought that the zombies would climb there too, but Mia advised them to just climb in and not contradict. The monsters were quickly approaching the shore and they were very aggressive, which was clearly visible from the speed of their approach. However, the main character had a means to complete the task in the best possible way. He began to draw a blade charged with electricity from its sheath. The plan was very simple. He decided to take advantage of his knowledge and use electricity to his advantage. So he dipped the sword into the water and discharged it. The discharge was so powerful that the electric waves were visible to the naked eye, and they quickly ran throughout the entire reservoir. For zombies, this was a fatal technique, since water was a good conductor of electric current, and it, without losing its power, hit them, burning them from the inside. This was enough to complete the task, because there were no conditions for completion, and such a cunning method worked quite well. Since the task was completed, a system window popped up to confirm this and reported that a new skill had been obtained for the task. This method surprised his partners. Mia was amazed by the power of this technique, and Tim was surprised by the originality of the approach. Suddenly, Mia felt something grab her leg and pull her towards it. It turned out to be Phil, who was so weak that he simply lay in the swamp, unable to get up, and asked for help from the girl. But the girl could not understand that it was her comrade and, out of fear, pulled out her leg and hit him in the head, causing him to begin to drown. But the main character and Tim were not so stupid and noticed that she hit Phil, who was now helplessly drowning. The girl reacted to this with a little mockery, saying that he was no different from a zombie and he himself scared her. By this point, Phil was able to find the strength to get out of the water, but he was very angry that his partner almost killed him. At this remark, the girl laughed and said that she kicked him lightly, taking everything said personally as a compliment. But it was not so. In her defense, she hinted that no one asked Phil to use such an ability, after which he became completely useless. Ron drew their attention to a red clot of light, above which there was a notification from the system that the boss would show up soon. He immediately took out his katana, because he understood that the battle would begin any second, and warned his comrades of the danger. After a few seconds, a barefoot actually appeared. It looked like a plant, only this plant had a huge mouth with many teeth. It was called a corpse flower. Phil was happy and angry at the same time. He was going to teach this boss an excellent lesson, and was already starting to move towards him. But the main character and Mia, knowing how this would end, ordered him not to approach the boss, since he would be of no use in close combat. Phil did not understand what the problem was, and the main character explained that the side effect of Phil's ability was too strong and it was better for him to fight at a distance. His comrades objected to this, saying that they specialize in close combat, and weapons and ammunition are not freely available since they are beginners. The main character reacted calmly to this and said that he should have told him about this earlier, since he had something in stock. Tearing off his jacket, he showed that he had quite a serious arsenal, which should be enough for their needs in this battle. The guys were very surprised by his arsenal, and they stood rooted to the spot looking at him, unable to take their eyes off because they had never seen anything like this. At this time, Mia was already fighting with the boss and shooting at him, but, of course, this did not have much effect, since there was not enough firepower. She noticed that her 3 comrades were now busy with absolute garbage, and asked them to help her since she could not cope. While she was shouting this, shots from a machine gun and pistols were heard behind her. The guys decided what to take and began to attack the boss. The main character noted that it's good that now many people play computer shooters. Because of this, they could use weapons at the level of intuition. After a few minutes, Mia noticed that the boss was not losing any life at all, since they had been attacking for a long time, and his health points had not decreased, and this was strange. The main character suspected something bad about this. Mia showed that the health points dropped, but immediately returned to their place. There was a swamp zombie in one of the tentacles of this corpse flower, and from everything it turned out that it attacked everyone indiscriminately. As it turned out, the zombie was captured for a reason, and the boss threw him into his mouth, after which he swallowed him and his health points again rose to 100. The main character quickly realized that the boss uses zombies as food, and at the same time drains their health points for himself, thus replenishing his supply. Mia was not very happy about this situation and did not understand how they could fight in this case, to which Ron said that there was nothing wrong with that, and when the corpses ran out, the boss would not be able to restore his life. At that moment, one of the tentacles rushed towards Mia and since she did not notice it, grabbed her without hindrance. The main character, of course, was right that when the zombies run out, the monster will stop replenishing health, but he did not say that the monster would start eating the living. The guys realized that they could no longer hesitate and needed to save their partner. They furiously rushed to the attack, trying to make it in time. But the monster was in no hurry to eat her, but began to grab her legs with its tentacles, and one of them reached into the chest area, which the girls really didn't like, and she tried to shout to the guys. But now, having seen the beautiful picture, these three brave warriors could not take their eyes off what was happening, and simply could not help her until they saw what would happen next. And when the monster stuck its tentacle under her t-shirt, she completely lost her composure because of the three perverts who were in no hurry to help her. She collected her thoughts and took out a pistol and shot off that damn tentacle that had been holding her all this time. Only she didn't calculate that if she cut it off, she would fall down from a great height, because this tentacle was holding her. Now she was afraid of falling to death. But the main character had seen enough of this, and this time decided to really help. He ran up and grabbed the girl in his arms, which prevented her from crashing. She thanked him, but for him it was a small thing. Several tentacles were flying in their direction, and Mia began to worry whether they would be able to dodge. But there was no need because the main character was excellent in the art of the sword, so he easily cut these tentacles without letting go of the girl's hands. The monster roared, because now he was really in pain, and he could not restore his health, which means something had to be done. Following the scream, a deafening sound was heard that swept throughout the entire dungeon, as it was very strong. This noise attack worked, and almost everyone in the group covered their ears as the noise was unbearable and felt like it would rupture their eardrums. However, Ron did not feel any damage as his level was clearly higher than the others. He prepared a charge on his sword and decided to attack immediately. He jumped on the spot in order to drive the sword deeper into the ground, because this was the most reasonable idea at that time. He did so, and when he landed, he stuck his sword into the ground and released an electrical discharge that spread across the surface. The plant received a powerful electric shock, from which it was immobilized for some time, which gave hope that this attack would be quite enough. At the end, when the discharge ended, the plant circled and began to creep to the ground, making it clear with its entire appearance that the battle was over. Ron knew that this monster was only a second level and he didn't need to use his full strength to destroy it, so he sheathed his sword. But he did not notice that the monster was still alive, and he was gradually recovering from such a powerful attack. Eventually, the plant rose up and the system notified that the boss was angry and therefore evolved and became stronger. Phil liked this news because he understood that after defeating such a boss, they would receive good rewards. But Tim was not sure if they could win. The main character had a misunderstanding of the situation, since he knew that the conduction of current was a strong attack. But despite this, the boss was for some reason almost unharmed. Mia knew a little about such issues and explained that grass is not a good conductor, and since the charge traveled along the ground, half of the power was spent along the way, and the boss, after all, is also a plant, this almost won't work on him. The main character didn't like the fact that she said this after he made the attack, so he gave her a click. The monster began to spit poison, quite large projectiles that flew at the players like large bullets. The main character reacted and dodged this unexpected attack. He noticed that after the evolution, the boss had new abilities and attacks. The poison flew past, missing its target, and landed straight on a tree standing behind, and it immediately began to melt. The main character immediately realized that things were bad for them and these poisonous bullets were very dangerous. He turned to the guys from the group and warned them of the danger. But it was, to put it mildly, already too late. The two partners stood covered from head to toe in poison, and the guy could not understand how they got caught like that. The plaintive voice of Mia was heard behind him, asking for help. The main character looked around, assuming the worst option. When he turned around, he saw that the clothes on Mia's body began to quickly melt and disappear, while the poison seemed harmless to the body. Literally a few seconds later, an almost completely naked girl stood in front of the main character, who was clearly not happy with this outcome. Ron quickly took off his jacket and, like a true gentleman, offered it to his partner so that she could cover her body. A familiar sound was heard from behind. The monster again fired a volley of poisonous bullets, and they flew straight at the two. The main character turned around and with one movement of his sword was able to destroy all 3 bullets, which was a pretty good move. However, this method was not very effective, since although the guy's sword skills were good, it was impossible to stop such large lumps of liquid with a thin sword, and naturally some of the poison would fall on the reflector. While the main character was racking his brain on how to defeat this monster, Phil's voice came from behind and came up with something. He explained that in real life he is a chemistry teacher and is good at it, so he has the skill of synthesis. The essence of this skill was simple. He could create new objects using two parts of something, which was not so useful since he could do it himself. Phil said that he had gasoline and fabric, and if he used his synthesis, he would get a flammable mixture. After he used the skill, the result was a Molotov cocktail, quite popular in games but insanely effective. Taking the bottle in his hands, the main character said that Phil simply combined two objects, and he himself is capable of this. The Molotov cocktail was a great idea since the electric shock had no effect, and now we'll have to try to burn it off to see if it works. And with these thoughts, he threw this jar straight into the monster's face. He could only hope that it would help. The bottle broke on impact and the monster was engulfed in flames. This time it was clear that he didn't like it at all and was actually dying. After a few minutes, the boss of this level burned out, which was confirmed by the system, and that they were now entitled to a reward for killing the boss. An unusual chest appeared in front of each player, and this made them very happy since this dungeon was not easy. Phil was the first to open the chest and took out his reward. It turned out to be a can of protein, which increased stamina, and now he could use his skill longer. Tim received iron armor, which also had effects, one of which was bullet resistance. That is, it was impossible to penetrate it with a bullet. Mia took out a skill book from the chest, the effect of which was the headshot skill, after using which her strength will increase by 300%. Ron was the last of the company to open the chest. He sat down and slowly lifted the lid. He was wondering what reward he would receive. Looking into the chest, he became embarrassed as if there was nothing there, but a bright light came from the chest. The rest were also interested in what the main character received, and when they saw it, they were surprised and thought that this was the best reward. Contrary to all the expectations of the protagonist, his reward turned out to be an egg, and even the system did not know whose it was, but gave a hint that something would hatch from it. 3 days have passed since that moment. The settlement expanded more and more, and has already begun to go beyond the old territory. More new players appeared in the game, and now all players could receive statuses. They received this opportunity for advancing in the game. For old players, this was great news, as they had been waiting for this moment for a long time, and now the system will evaluate them. The new player noticed Mia and ran up to her joyfully. He wanted to ask her for tips on how to level up at the start of the game. She reacted calmly to this, and since she remembered how strong zombies were, especially at the start of the game, she advised cutting down trees and plowing the land. That is, everything she did herself. As it turned out, this guy was a fan of hers and had never seen her live. But now she gave him advice, and he decided to keep up with his idol and got to work. The old players were quietly working in the garden and were in no hurry. After completing this task, they were going to buy better garden tools and equipment. In the main office of the settlement, the main character sat and Chloe told him about the news. She said that the new people were working even harder than the old ones. The main character liked this because he didn't have to worry about expanding the shelter, and now this process happened automatically. However, Chloe said that not everything is so good because there are already too many people. They have an oversupply of labor, and they need to think about new bases. The main character understood this perfectly well, but from the player's point of view, because if they are always in the same shelter, sooner or later they will get tired of it, and new points are simply necessary. In this case, the guy asked the girl if there were any territories near their headquarters, to which she said that there were some, but they were occupied by zombies. However, there was one problem, that all the strongholds were located on the territory of the central settlements, and in order to expand, they would need to be authorized. She showed a map on which it was clearly visible that the lands had long been divided between villages, since power had ceased to exist as such. Also, the central settlement was divided between the main forces, and their owners were called Copperheads, since they were the strongest of the awakened ones. This did not greatly puzzle the main character, since this is approximately what should have happened. But since they want to expand their territories, they cannot avoid conflict. At that moment, Erica ran into the room and brought bad news. A group had arrived from the central settlement to collect taxes. This surprised Chloe very much, but the main character was not at all afraid and went to deal with this small problem. In front of the settlement stood a plump man who introduced himself as a tax inspector from the central settlement, and that residents were obliged to give 50% of the production every month. However, one of the locals was forgiving, because when this territory belonged to a gang of wolves, no one cared, but now they owe something. To this objection, the tax inspector simply pulled out a gun and pointed it towards the resident, clearly intending to pull the trigger. Since he was not a good-natured person, he did just that. He pulled the trigger, knowing that it would kill someone. But after the shot, he was very surprised and did not understand how this was possible, because he had definitely fired a pistol. Tim stood in front of the villager in his iron armor. There was a small dent on the breastplate. This indicated that he had absorbed the blow. This plump man did not understand what happened because he fired and hit, and this man did not seem to notice. When the resident realized what had happened, he asked Tim if he was okay, because he did not believe in the reliability of this armor. Tim smiled and said that it was all nothing, since he had this thing that would protect him from everything. The newcomers who saw this were completely convinced that this player was abnormal since he blocked the bullet with his body. By this moment, the main character managed to approach. He introduced himself to the tax inspector and asked what was happening and what they wanted. The tax inspector decided to change his words a little and offered residents protection if they paid taxes. But the main character calmly asked him the question, why, when this territory belonged to wolves, when distress signals were received from it, no one from the center came to help? To this, the inspector smiled and said that they had some difficulties and they themselves were barely surviving, and now they are ready to help. Then Ron decided to put the pressure on him with the following statement, that the center did not come to people's aid when they needed it, and now they decided to collect taxes. Since this was a refusal, the inspector decided to act as usual and threw in his pistol, ordering his men to also raise their rifles. It was a pure threat. Since his men were well equipped, he thought that he would be able to intimidate the main one and everything would be fine. But the main character not only was not afraid, but also remained absolutely calm. In response to this rude gesture, he simply snapped 2 fingers, and behind him appeared many players, each of whom had good equipment and excellent weapons, which meant their advantage. The inspector couldn't understand how such a small settlement got so many weapons, so he asked the players about it. They openly said that they get weapons from dungeons, for bonuses, or for simple farming. They said this with very pleased faces. Then the inspector decided to retreat, because he recognized that they were many times stronger than them, and the best thing to do now would be to retreat. But the main character was not going to let go of the man who shot one of the players so easily, and he decided that now it was his turn to shoot the inspector. Turning around, the inspector realized that the main character was aiming at his ass, and he screamed in confusion, not knowing what the main character wanted to do. And all he had to do was just shoot at the inspector. There was a pop and several splashes of blood jumped out of his buttock. The guards lifted the inspector and carried him away because they could not answer, fearing for their lives. But he did not calm down and shouted that they would answer for this. Mia stood at the head of the protesting crowd of players and showed the fact to the people leaving. The other players also shouted that they should no longer dare to come to their territory. Chloe was terrified, because this could lead to an inevitable conflict, and for her reasons, it would be more logical to unite with the central settlement. To this, the main character simply answered that if he had given up, he would have lost most of the people's support, and these people will never get enough. Plus, there are more and more people in the settlement and supplies are no longer enough, so something needs to be done. Erica stood in bewilderment, since newcomers were generally fearless, and in such a situation even she, an experienced hunter, began to worry a little. But the main character knew why they were so fearless, because for them it was just a game. But in real life they are afraid of almost everything. Whatever one may say, the central settlement was central and very large. After all, it was a city, some part of which was well preserved. Sitting on a chair was an elegant man in a red suit, whose name was Drac. He had just learned that his inspector was attacked by residents of the shelter. The inspector sat on his knees and said that any attempt on his life meant that these people were threatening Drac himself. This was quite true, but there was something wrong in the expression on his boss's face. It was somehow sinister, and he also had snake eyes. The inspector did not notice this and began to beg his master to teach the inhabitants of that shelter a lesson since they deserved it. Drac said that he had heard about a young man named Ron who had done a lot of things lately, and he would like to meet him, but he couldn't go empty-handed. The inspector did not understand what his owner wanted and suggested that junior employees prepare everything necessary. But his owner said that it was not at all necessary to go somewhere because he had already found the gift. He put his finger to the inspector's forehead. He already understood what was being said, but it was too late to correct anything. His owner decided that his head would be a gift for Ron. An instant later, a snake crawled out of the back of the inspector's head, piercing right through his head, which of course quickly killed the poor fellow. A couple of days later, there was a fair in the shelter. All the players and even ordinary residents were selling their items and goods. As a rule, at such events, they did not always sell high-quality items. For example, these merchants sold an almost unusable shield and sword. Since one product could be purchased due to the apparent lack of another, these merchants often quarreled over undesirable proximity. The main character looked around his possessions and was surprised at how quickly the shelter grew in size, most likely due to the arrival of new players. He decided to check this using the status window, and indeed there were too many people in the shelter. Because of this, a negative effect appeared, and people's mood dropped and the productivity of the shelter dropped. The system required that some measures be taken, but the main character did not want to open a new shelter and understood that in this case difficulties could not be avoided. Suddenly, a very expensive car drove up to the shelter. It was somewhat reminiscent of a Lamborghini, which means its owner was a wealthy man. Such a curiosity in a post-apocalyptic world immediately attracted the attention of everyone present, because this is not something you see every day. When the car stopped, its doors slowly opened and people began to climb out. The new guests in the shelter were two strangers, a man in a rather expensive outfit and a woman, obviously his assistant. This man immediately introduced himself and said that he was the manager of the central district, and he would like to talk with the head of this settlement. The locals did not like this, since they remembered the previous visit from the central settlement, so they began to drive away the guests, not even wanting to listen. But this pleasant young man bowed to these simple workers and said that he had already dealt with his subordinate, who had caused inconvenience to the residents of this settlement. His subordinate opened the box and took out the head of the tax inspector who came here before them. This both frightened those present and convinced them that this man had come on other issues. The main character could not ignore such an important guest and came up to greet him, and he also asked him to come with him if he wanted to discuss something. Drac was struck by the appearance of his interlocutor. This showed him to be a true connoisseur of style, and he agreed to go into the office. But before he left, he told his subordinate to guard the entrance, and if anything went wrong, she was sure to report. The two entered a spacious room, in the center of which there was a table and many chairs. This was the main hall of the shelter. The subordinate of the head of the central region obediently took a position near the entrance. She looked rather serious. 3 players began to discuss it, because for them it was a new NPC character, and Mia was surprised at how well it was worked out. And they also had a guess that a secret quest might appear. Mia realized that the other players were afraid to start a dialogue with this girl and decided to start first in order to set an example for the guys. But as soon as she wanted to move in her direction, she was stopped by Rex, who did not like this idea, and he warned her not to mess with this girl. But this did not stop Mia. It just so happened that she was too self-confident and therefore thought that she would succeed the first time, because she knows how to flirt with girls. She approached this girl and hit the wall with her fist, taking a confident position. She invited the girl to go to her room, because she has an excellent bed. This was an obvious hint. This proposal interested the stranger, and she said that if she wanted something like that, she would first have to defeat her in battle, and if she succeeded, then her body would be at the complete disposal of the winner. The guys who heard this immediately blushed. Since they had not yet been close to the girls, they could not believe such a proposal. Mia immediately accepted this challenge and began to flex her fists. She definitely thought that she could win. At that time, in the office, there was a casual conversation between the 2 heads of the settlements. There was a map of the area on the table. The main character did not understand why Drac came to his settlement, so he asked him about it directly. Drac, in turn, did not beat around the bush and said that he was interested in this settlement and was ready to buy it, and if Ron agreed, then his place in heaven was guaranteed. The main character did not intend to give up the dialogue so quickly, so he asked if there was still such a place left in this world. But Drac spoke quite confidently, and it was clear that he believed in his words, so he said that this was quite possible. He offered everything to the main character and explained that as long as someone has power, the whole world can become a paradise for him. He also said that the main character should not worry about the inhabitants of this settlement, and he would take all this trouble upon himself. The main character showed a friendly face, because this offer was indeed tempting, and Drac was already sure that he had won. But after being friendly, The protagonist's face expressed dissatisfaction, and his final answer was refusal. This fairly angered the head of the central settlement, and he demanded an explanation for this refusal because he considered the guy an intelligent person. The answer was very simple, because the main character loved freedom, and he did not want to become a bird locked in a cage. This made Drac even more angry, and he began to show his snake nature. He said that he had already heard something similar, and the fate of this man was not good. The main character did not want to know the details and offered this businessman a deal. This clearly interested him, and he wanted to know what kind. The main character took a map and pointed to the trade route through which the caravans of the central settlement passed. He knew that a Vulcan gang lived there and was causing inconvenience to the settlement. Drac said that this group occupied the metallurgical plant and was quite strong, because there had already been military expeditions there and not one was successful. Then the main character took out a knife and stuck it in exactly the place where this gang was located on the map. He offered to deal with this group, and in return, the central settlement would stop harassing his settlement. But Drac did not believe in the success of this operation, so he was interested in what would happen if they failed. The main character said that if they lose, the shelter will belong to the central settlement, so in any case, the head did not lose anything from such a deal. This state of affairs suited Drac, and since he was a serious person, he decided to sign an agreement that confirmed the deal. As soon as they signed this agreement, Drac hurried to leave the settlement and wished him luck in this mission. Ron wasn't going to see his guest off, but he heard some noise on the street and had to see what happened there. In front of the entrance to the building, there was a bunch of players lying and a serious girl towering over them. It was obvious that she had killed everyone. Drac was stunned by the girl's behavior and decided to find out what happened, to which she replied that they were just playing. With this picture in mind, Drac decided to gloat a little and said that the skills of Ron's subordinates were not very good, and they could not withstand the onslaught of the Vulcan gang. But this did not affect the main character in any way, and he replied that they are like a bunch of stray dogs. If they want to eat, they will break any bones. On such a pleasant note, the guests got into the car and left the settlement, and the main character watched them and was surprised at the strength of this girl. This girl's name was Now, and Drac asked what she thought about these people, and she replied that they were weak, but she had not seen the strength of everyone, so she could not give an exact answer. But something still bothered her, because while she was fighting with them, she had the feeling that these people were not afraid to die. The head of the central settlement reassured her and said that such people are usually the first to die, and that is why he is confident that Ron will lose. Meanwhile, the players who were taken down by Now began to come to their senses and began to wonder if they were being too reckless. The main character decided to make an announcement and said that a time-limited event had begun in the game, which was called Defeat the Vulcan Gang. All participants in this event would receive a reward. For all the players, this was both good and not so good news. Phil decided to find out what the difference between this event and the dungeon was. The main character explained to the players that in this event, enemies do not respawn, and for each they will receive points, and for every 3 enemies killed, special rewards. After he finished talking about the awards, Mia immediately moved forward to perform the event. The main character decided to ask her where she was going, because he had not yet finished talking about this event. She was as enthusiastic as usual and said that whoever comes first will receive the main rewards, so she goes first. Even in such a simple situation, she was able to distinguish herself, and the main character showed her that the gang was on the other side. Erica approached the main character. She was clearly worried. She knew about the contract, but the Vulcan gang was much stronger than the wolves, and she was worried about the guys. Even realizing that this was actually the case, the main character was confident that they would cope, and Erica did not understand where such confidence came from. And the main character decided to explain to her why these people would cope with such a task, even if it was more difficult. After all, they were more like the 4 elements of disaster for this world than ordinary hunters or bandits. In the small hut, dissatisfied cries of men were heard. They demanded that the residents get out of the house because it was time to pay for protection. The woman sat on her knees and held a handful of crystals in her hands and asked to take them all as payment. But the man was offended by such a gesture, and he decided that she mistook them for some beggars and knocked the crystals out of her hands. Another bandit took out a can of gasoline, opened it, and began to pour the contents. It was obvious why he was doing this. He began to pour gasoline on the woman's little daughter, who was holding her teddy bear in her hands. She was crying because she was scared. This soulless man lit a lighter and demanded that the woman tell where she kept the jewelry. Otherwise, she would watch her daughter burn. The woman realized that the worst was about to happen. She fell face down on the floor, bowing and praying that they would let her daughter go because they really had nothing. But this angered the bandit even more, as he was sure that the woman did not want to tell the truth, so he ordered action. The woman raised her face. She screamed and begged the bandits not to do this, because it was too cruel even for this world. But these pleas did not reach the ears of these inhuman people, and the bandit, smiling mockingly, let go of the lighter. The girl closed her eyes so as not to see this. She squeezed the bear even tighter and called her mother for help. Suddenly, a hand appeared and grabbed the lighter above the girl's head. The bandits could not have expected this. The one who saved the girl was the main character. He carelessly brought the lighter to the cigarette and lit it, asking if these two were from the Vulcan gang. The bandit was surprised that since this person knew who dared to stop them, it was akin to suicide. Together with the main character was Mia. She decided to divide the bandits. Since there were two of them, she decided to take on the guy with the mohawk. He was definitely offended by her comment about her hair, and without hesitation, he pulled out a flamethrower. Flames began to rapidly fly towards the girl, which was quite dangerous for a person since it could burn him alive. Mia was engulfed in flames and completely consumed her. She immediately began screaming that she was very hot. The bandit was only amused by this. He was glad to see someone burning alive. He shouted that she would be baptized and burned to the ground. The main character decided to bring the girl to her senses and decided to remind her that she is a game character and she cannot be hurt. Since her reflex of consciousness that fire is hot was triggered, she did not immediately realize that she did not feel pain from it. At that moment, the bandit began to back away since his only weapon was useless against her, and this frightened him. Then the girl, engulfed in flames, rushed towards the bandit. She was determined to strike him, and she succeeded. Having quickly accelerated, she hit him in the face with all her might, causing him to fly back. Only since she was engulfed in flames, after the blow it spread to the bandit and he began to burn alive. The second bandit realized that they could not win. Since their comrade had already died, he said that even if he was killed, the Vulcan gang would not calm down. But he didn't know what these people were thinking. But the main character explained to him that he would not kill him. A deafening cry of pain was heard above the forest, from which even the birds flew up from the trees. When the bandit opened his eyes, there were several people in front of him, and the first thing he realized was that he would not be able to escape. Since he was tied to a chair, he could only speak. He did not understand who these people were and why they brought him here. The main character put on a straight face and said that they needed information about the Vulcan gang, and if he cooperated, no harm would come to him. The bandit's answer was categorical. He was offended. While his master was protecting him, he was not afraid, at least that's what he said. From the darkness, a stick appeared at one end of which a flame smoldered, and it was clear what it was needed for. This stick turned out to be a red-hot iron, which Rex was holding in his hands, and he was sure that since the bandit was not afraid of fire, he clearly would not tolerate this. It was clear from the bandit's face that he was scared, but he said that he was a member of the Vulcan gang and had been baptized, and even if he was burned with iron, he would not deviate from his goal. But Rex asked him why he thought they would burn him, and then the bandit finally stopped understanding what they would do to him. Rex, with a calm face, told the prisoner that he would insert this metal rod into his ass, and the temperature of 800 degrees Celsius would turn his intestines into mud. It was clear that this guy was not joking and was really going to pull this off, so the bandit fidgeted in his chair. Even though he tried to seem fearless, in the end, he burst into tears and agreed to tell everything, if only they would remove this piece of iron. Rex calmly threw the metal rod aside and said that everything turned out to be simpler than he thought. Turning to his comrades, he asked if everything was okay because it was not very pleasant to see this, but everyone immediately put their hands behind them and said that everything was fine. The main character was impressed by how quickly Rex was able to extract information from the enemy, and especially his threats. He wanted to know where he learned this. Rex answered without hesitation that this place was Afghanistan, and this surprised the main character even more. Again, if you evaluate the appearance of this man, it was clear that he was telling the truth, and the main character decided that such a shot should not be missed. At this time, the bandit asked that if he told everything he knew or important information for them, would he be released? Then the main character pretended to be as friendly as possible, spread his arms to the sides and said that this was true because they were not demons. The bandit began to say that his leader's name is Vulcan, and he is a pyromaniac, and over the years the number of arson and victims is only growing. Besides all this, This man was so ruthless that his hobby was watching living people burn. The players listened to this description and were delighted with the development of this villain. Of course, they could not know that this was all for real and thought that this was a game plot. The main character was satisfied with this information, but he still had questions, and he asked if Vulcan had a lot of treasures, since according to rumors he had robbed many people. The bandit answered this question without hesitation, saying that he heard that his leader had a lot of gold, but the main character was interested in how much and where it was. However, the bandit did not know where the treasures were, according to him. Many tried to find them but could not, but the main character could already smell the gold. He imagined how he would finish this business and have a whole fortune in which he could wallow without complaint. Since the leader stopped asking questions, Rex decided to find out what weapons the Vulcan gang had, since this was no less valuable information. From the information of the bandit, it followed that there were about 100 people in the gang, and each of them had a Molotov cocktail, a flamethrower, and other weapons. He also said that the territory where the base is located is equipped with mines, and it will not be possible to approach safely from the front. Since attacking from the outside was a dangerous and obviously losing tactic, Rex suggested sneaking inside and attacking from there. The main character liked this idea and said that when the bandit returned, he would take them with him. He also said that after joining the gang, he would have to undergo the rite of baptism of the volcano, but the bandit did not know about this. Then the main character explained that the essence of the ritual is that your hand is burned with fire, and if you can bear it, you will pass. This was not such an easy test for the bandit, and he was clearly nervous. The people in the room were clearly not happy about this. Then it finally began to dawn on the bandit that these were definitely not people in front of him. Because people cannot help but be afraid of pain, he began to think that they were monsters. The territory of the volcano's base was driven to the ground and dotted with crosses, on each of which hung the burnt bodies of people. The main character Rex and Mia stood in front of Vulcan and asked to join their gang, because they had heard about its greatness. Vulcan sat on a huge throne and indifferently said that since they came here, they knew about the condition of joining the gang. From that moment on, the acting began. Ron said that for the sake of Vulcan, nothing would be spared, and they prepared for the ritual. Mia screamed that it didn't matter to her, whether in oil or sauce. The leader liked this enthusiasm, and he said that there were 3 of them, and they needed to choose which of them would start the test first. The main character volunteered to go through this test first, but since he was not a player, he felt the pain differently, so he came up with a different method. He walked up to the table and without hesitation placed his hand on it, thereby showing his readiness. The bandit standing nearby was holding a flamethrower in his hands. He was sure that the new guys would fail, since not everyone was able to pass such a test. Without waiting for long, he pulled the trigger, and a stream of flame flew out of the flamethrower. The essence of this test was to endure severe pain, so you voluntarily put your hand up and they began to burn it with fire. However, the main character was a little hesitant before starting the test, since he was human and thought that it would hurt, but he was not hot. Again, this is a performance, so the main character raised his burning hand and said that he expected more from the volcano test. His behavior greatly angered the bandit, and he said that this was not the limit of his power, and now the main character would experience double firepower. The main character did not expect such a turn, because he thought that the test would end there, but a new stream of flame was already flying towards his hand. When the main character pretended to feel the flame, the bandit began to jump for joy and shout that this is the power of the volcano, and now the guy will have to beg for mercy, otherwise his hand will burn. But contrary to all expectations, the main character did not feel the fire at all. On the contrary, he felt pleasant. Other players watched this initiation and were shocked that their leader was not only not afraid of fire, but also enjoyed it. He seemed cool to them. When the flame went out, the main character raised his hand up and concluded that there was no damage to his hand. Since Mia was a player, she thought that the main character reduced the damage because he is a player, but she didn't know that for this world he was real. Then she decided to be the second one. She also put out her hand pathetically and said that she was ready to endure any pain in order to join the Vulcan gang. Since the bandit with the flamethrower was no longer going to be surprised by anything, he asked her to cope with this test, since her friend had done well. But when the flame touched her hand, she began to beat feverishly on the floor, writhing in pain and saying that she was going to burn. This unstoppable whining caught even the volcano himself, and in order not to listen to it, he ordered it to be put out and the next one to start. Returning to everyone, Mia decided to ask if she played her role well because she tried very hard. But the faces of these two were not the least bit happy. The main character thought that she had overdone it, and Rex thought that they had both overacted. Since it was now Rex's turn, he walked out to the table and extended his right hand. He was ready for what was about to happen. The bandit, who had a flamethrower in his hands, already began to doubt that in this trio there were, in principle, normal people. Then he lowered the flamethrower and pulled the trigger a third time. The flames quickly engulfed Rex's hand, but he was ready for it. One of the conditions was not to show pain, so Rex stood silently and did not shout out anything. For him, it was like torture where he could not split. The boss of the Vulcan gang appreciated this action and said that these three were now officially members of the Vulcan gang. When Rex approached his comrades, he was praised for his very lively acting performance, since even the main character felt pain from such a sight. But as it turned out, of all three, he was the only one who did not turn off the pain and truly endured it all. Suddenly, an older man approached the young people and said that he was a mentor for the newcomers, and he had a task, by completing which they would be able to contribute to the development of the gang. The main character assumed that everything would go according to this scenario, so he thought it was a great idea to accept this task in order to strengthen his position in the gang. After the mentor's words, Mia, without waiting for a long time, put her glasses over her eyes and was already holding a sword in her hands, completely ready for the upcoming mission. It began to seem to the main character that she was very flighty and that someday it would come back to bite them. Since the newcomers agreed, the old man said that they would have to be intercepted by a truck sent from the central settlement, because there was a lot of stuff inside that was important for the volcano. The main character perfectly understood the scale of this operation, and it seemed to him that 3 people were not enough to rob such a serious target. At this, the old man pointed behind him that the elite of their camp would go along with the newcomers. And he also mentioned that the cargo was very important, and they should under no circumstances lose it. The main character nodded affirmatively and promised that they would not let their leader and mentor down, since they had no room for error. Now the 3 newcomers stood as full-fledged members of the gang. Mia could not believe that everything turned out so simply. The main character said that now there was nothing to fear because it was just a game and they could take action. But Rex was not sure of such simplicity. Suddenly a bottle fell out of the protagonist's pocket and clanged loudly on the floor. It turned out to be strong and did not break after the fall. This attracted Mia's attention. She decided to pick up this bottle to look at it. She could not understand what it was. The main character was struck like lightning, because he could not even imagine that such a setup would come from the bottle. He was simply speechless, and he could not answer Mia's question. She, in turn, remembered that she saw this substance when Ron was taking a bath, as he rubbed it into his body. This information finished off the main character because it turned out that she was spying on him, and it was not for nothing that a chill ran down his back when he washed himself. Rex also confirmed this. She realized that she had said too much, and hastened to justify herself by saying that she was not spying on anyone, but was simply passing by. The main character took the jar and said that it was sunscreen, but the girl didn't believe it and decided that he was taking her for a fool. But in order for her to leave him behind, the main character said that this thing increases attributes and it worked. Only she wanted to smear herself too. The guy pressed the jar to his chest with all his appearance, showing that it was very valuable to him, and said that it was expensive. It was a fire-resistant cream. Because the main character could not reduce the level of pain like the players, he had to improvise. A group of guys approached the newcomers. One of them congratulated the first on joining and introduced himself, saying that his group had joined a little earlier. The main character realized that in order not to reveal their plans, they needed to win back the gang members, and he asked the guy if he would recommend anything. In response, the guy grabbed Ron's hand and began to sincerely admire how the main character passed the test of the volcano, because not many people are capable of this. In order not to offend such a fanatical character, the main character decided to say that everything he does is for the glory of the volcano. The guy only became more delighted and said that the mentor had already told everything about the task and the machines were already ready, so there was no need to delay. After some time, 3 cars drove out into the wasteland, one of which contained the main character and his team. The retreating cars were watched by the head of the Vulcan gang and mentor. Vulcan was almost sure that the newcomers were spies from Drac. The mentor said that he assumed this, so on their first mission he sent them to attack the Drac caravan. Vulcan clenched his hand and a fire lit up in his fist. He promised himself that if they betrayed his gang, he would torture them with fire until they died. A few hours later, the group sent on the mission arrived at the transfer point. According to information, this was the right place. All members of the group sat at the table and were served a signature dish, which the older comrade ordered. It was noodles with ox's eyes. He sat and beamed with joy, also called this dish the pinnacle of cooking and wanted beginners to try it too. But they, seeing such culinary delights for the first time, decided that he should eat it first, and they would eat it later if the appetite came. The elder ate this dish on both cheeks and said that the pass is a checkpoint through which all caravans pass, and their destination should arrive soon. The main character decided to assess the situation and said that the caravan would probably be guarded, and if a firefight broke out, they would lose their advantage. The elder reacted to this easily. He smiled and put his chopsticks on the table. He said that he had already ordered that the road be mined, and this would help them attack suddenly. Rex held one of these mines in his hands and examined it. Then he began to name its characteristics and was able to name every single one. This greatly surprised the elder because there were few such experts, and he decided that Rex would help him calm down the idiots of their settlement. At that moment, an armored vehicle began to slowly drive into the territory of the transshipment point, and people began to run away in panic. This was the long-awaited caravan. The main character and Rex watched this machine and were surprised how strong it was, because this could complicate their task. While they were watching this, a boy ran out onto the road and his ball jumped out. He did not pay attention to the approaching transport. The boy's mother was horrified when she saw where her son was, but she was too far away to help him. Having picked up his ball, the boy finally noticed the car, but it was too late, and he could not move from his place, but only helplessly called for his mother. At the last moment, he was saved by Mia, who took a running jump, which allowed him to quickly cover the required distance. The transport began to slow down and turned into the place where there was a stall in which the main character and Rex were located. Because when the car drove up to this stall, it hit him a little. The owner almost started to go hysterical, since that was all he had. Several people got out of the car. A fit man stood in the center. He asked whose child it was because he could stain the car with his blood. But from the side, Mia started yelling at him and pointing out his mistakes in driving, and that it was very dangerous. This man introduced himself as Hob, and said that he obeys Drac, and in this territory he makes the rules himself, and he does not care about a few insignificant lives. This completely pissed Mia off, and she started to get very angry. She started insulting this idiot because he was really annoying her. Hob, without thinking twice, took out a pistol and said, "Since she is so brave, let her talk to the bullet in his pistol." He began to think about what to shoot her. At this time, the main character came up to Mia and hugged her. He said that this is his girlfriend and she is a little weak in mind, and as an apology, he will cover the cost of food. This made Mia both angry and blushing, because she was called a girl, but the main character asked her to calm down and not aggravate the situation. Hob put the gun away and said that he was in a good mood today, so he would forgive this trick. He was also pleased with the idea of free food. When these people went towards the stall, Rex approached the main character, and the main character asked him if everything was ready, to which he received an affirmative answer. Hob raised a mug of beer and made a toast in which he wished everyone satiation and hoped that Drac would praise him for his good trade. The main character watched this meal and enjoyed it, because his plan was already in motion, which means everything will be fine soon. Suddenly, someone's heavy hand fell on his shoulder, which made him jerk a little because he was in his thoughts. Turning around, he saw that it was Hob and, making a satisfied face, asked if everything suited him. Hob said that everything is fine, but the main character is frail and cannot stand up for his girlfriend, and he advised him not to leave the house so as not to lose face. The main character continued to smile and did not show that he was much stronger than this upstart and could kill him in a second. But everything would happen soon. Hob laughed and told his men to get into their cars. It was time for them to move on. A few minutes passed and the caravan drove away from the transit point, only emitting wisps of smoke from the muffler. The main character took the radio and said that the target had left the transfer point and would be there in a few minutes, so you need to be prepared. The car drove calmly through the desert area, and the people inside could not even imagine what would happen in a few minutes. Suddenly, the driver turned pale and told his commander that he was starting to have stomach problems. This angered the commander, and he said that no one forced him to eat so much, and if he spoiled the air right in the car, he would be shot. And as planned, the car ran over a mine with its front wheel. It was obvious what would happen next. There was a very strong explosion. the epicenter of which was directly under the car, and the powerful wave threw the car up. This force was enough for such a heavy armored vehicle to roll over on its side and could no longer continue moving. Hob opened the side door and began to climb out of the car. He was a little beaten up, but he was not injured. He was interested in who attacked them. The main character Mia and Rex came out of the smoke left by the explosion. The guy asked Hob if he had forgotten him, because not much time had passed. Behind these three, there were many more people, and they all obviously decided to attack the caravan. The main character told Hob another trigger phrase. "Since we ate, it's time to hit the road," because those were his words. When the leader of the caravan realized who had attacked him, he began, like everyone else like him, to boast of his power and threaten his leader. But the main character interrupted Hob and told him that his leader was the impudent Drac, thereby showing that he was not afraid, and offered to give the goods in exchange for his life. But Hob twisted his face in an angry grimace and explained that since they have the courage to rob them, do they know what kind of goods they are? The main character said without hesitation that this could not be anything other than supplies or luxury items or maybe cigarettes. Hob jumped from the vehicle, rifle in hand, and ordered his men to prepare for battle as the situation escalated. Quite a few people got out of the car and had excellent ammunition and equally good weapons. This confused the elder. He did not understand where the guards got so many weapons. At least there was no information about such weapons. But when they attacked them, everything immediately became clear, because the goods they were transporting turned out to be weapons, and there was plenty of it. The main character knew what this could mean. He said that this was outright smuggling and was a serious crime even in this world. But of course, the people who transport the weapons know what they are doing, so Hob opened fire and ordered the others to attack too. Everyone from the volcano group was covered with heavy fire, and the main character covered himself and hurried to hide behind something. He was able to find a stone and hide behind it, but he saw that the elder was in no hurry to take cover and told him to hurry up. But the eldest no longer heard him. He began to pour flammable liquid on himself and shouted to his brothers that this was their test, and it was time to prove their faith. And picking up his enthusiasm, the others also began to pour this liquid over themselves, while praising the leader of the volcano. When the liquid was absorbed into the clothes of the elder, he set himself on fire and was immediately engulfed in a large flame, and he endured this pain. The others followed his example in exactly the same order, and soon the burning people began to rapidly approach the enemies. Hob grabbed a more powerful weapon, and he was frightened by what was happening. But reasoning soberly, he ordered the destruction of these psychos. They opened fire on them, but the eldest ordered his brothers to endure the pain and reach the target without noticing anything. In the end, their target was the soldiers who were guarding the caravan. When they got close to them, they grabbed them in their fiery embrace. Hob realized that their affairs were bad and began to shoot in their direction, scolding his comrades for not being able to stand up for themselves. But at some point his stomach suddenly twisted, and he realized that this was not just a reaction of the body. The main character realized that his idea had worked, and decided that now he could begin to implement the plan. First of all, he used the skill of changing muscles and raised above himself a boulder, behind which he had recently been hiding from heavy fire. Taking aim a little, the main character threw a stone at a guard standing nearby, which was to be expected. It was instant death. Hob fell to his knees clutching his stomach, now realizing that Ron had poisoned the food, and he said that it was a vile act. But the main character said that no one forced him to eat, and, in principle, they are at war. And in such a situation, any methods are good. Seeing the main character's sword, Hob was already anticipating his victory. He took out a pistol and said that what is more important is whether the sword or the pistol is faster. But the main character said that the pistol is faster only within 7 steps. After these words, he threw the sword towards Hob. Of course, he could not expect this, and the sword absolutely hit him in the hand and knocked out the pistol that he boasted so much about. And as the main character intended, the gun flew straight into his hand, and now he said that this was the limit of 7 steps. The next moment, a large through-hole appeared in Hob's head, which was made by a bullet from his own pistol. The main character blew away the smoke coming out of the barrel and said that firearms differ from cold weapons only in that they are more accurate and faster. In the meantime, the battle was over and only coals were left of the enemies. It was a clear victory in principle for Ron's detachment, even without losses. Rex reported that all members of the Vulcan gang were killed, but apparently they were originally victims. Now they needed to deliver weapons to the Vulcan. Mia had already collected some of the weapons, and she didn't really like the idea of giving away so many good weapons. The main character became thoughtful, because it turned out that Mia was finally right and giving up the weapon would be wrong, since their goal was to destroy the Vulcan gang. Then Rex said that there was only one way to get weapons without arousing suspicion among the Vulcan gang. The main character agreed to such a move because it really was the only way. Rex took out a pistol and said that he was ready. Mia stood all this time between these two and sincerely did not understand what they were talking about and what kind of method this was. Then Rex put his gun to his temples and said that in the future everything falls on their shoulders. Ultimately, he pulled the trigger, which only convinced the protagonist of his usefulness and scared Mia very much. After some time, they were able to deliver the bodies of all the members of the Vulcan gang to the base. Among these bodies was Rex's body. The main character stood in front of the gang leader. He skillfully pretended and said that the enemy had strong firepower, and all the gang members died in battle. Vulcan approached the main character and put his hand on his shoulder. He said that they had passed the test and were now appointed as the main part of the Vulcan gang. The main character bowed as a sign of respect. Again, this was required by his cover, since it was too early to reveal himself. He smiled maliciously and was glad that everything went perfectly. And now only a small part of the plan remained. At this time, not far from the outskirts of the camp, Erica decided to play at a shooting gallery with zombies, and, in principle, such weak monsters could allow this. She was angry that she didn't know where Ron had gone, so she decided to take her anger out on the monsters. Everything would be fine, but a huge zombie appeared behind her, and without even turning around, she realized that it was someone strong. Realizing that this was a second-level zombie, she decided to fight back and turned around and wanted to start shooting back. But, as one would expect, the monster did not wait for her actions and attacked first, hitting her with his hand, from which she flew far to the side. Falling on her back, she cursed herself again and again for her helplessness, but did not give up hope that she would be able to pull herself up. Suddenly, a girl appeared above the head of this giant who had a huge axe like the enemies. She was going to kill this big guy. It was Linda. As planned, she hit this zombie on the head with an axe, causing him to fall dead. The girl stood in front of Erica in a victorious stance, and she did not understand who this girl was, since she was seeing her for the first time. But Linda smiled welcomingly and introduced herself, saying that she was a player, and she also extended a helping hand to Erica. After such a victory, the girls decided that it would be nice to cool off in the water, since after the fight they were pretty dirty. Linda was surprised at how realistic the taste was in this game, and Erica decided to show her that not only taste, but also touch is real. But while they were having so much fun, Linda's string on her bra came undone, and it was carried away into the water, and something had to be done. Linda reacted with lightning speed and immediately dived into the water for her bra, because it was important to her. As a result, after a few seconds she emerged naked with a bra in her hands, and joyfully shouted to Erica that she had caught it. However, she did not notice that she had already swum a considerable distance and found herself a little different from where she was. In front of her stood a guy who saw her in all her glory. Realizing the situation she found herself in, she covered her chest with her hands and screamed loudly that this guy was a pervert because he didn't take his eyes off her. The guy began to panic no less and began waving his arms, claiming that his name was Ron. The girl knew this name, but the guy did not look like its owner. Then the main character applied transformation and regained his real appearance. This was supposed to convince the girl of his words. Seeing her friend in front of her, the girl calmed down and believed that it was him. But the guy did not expect Linda to play such a game. And everything seemed to be going well. They made peace and began a calm conversation when Erica crept up from behind and knocked out the main character by hitting him on the head. After some time, the guy began to come to his senses. The blow was quite strong, and his head still hurt. 2 girls were sitting before his eyes. When his mind began to return, he decided to find out what happened, since he had just seen his grandmother, who was calling him to the other side of the bridge. Sitting nearby was Erica, who had long ago realized what she had done and peacefully asked for forgiveness, because she had simply confused Ron with a pervert. But the main character had finally regained his common sense and blurted out that if he were a pervert, he would never have attacked Erica. As one would expect, this made her very angry, and she, as usual, began to strangle her master without fear of consequences. Once this little misunderstanding was sorted out, the main character said that it was time to return to the camp and make an important announcement. A lot of people had already gathered in the shelter, and everyone was waiting for the chapter. None of them knew what would happen and what would be discussed. The main character came onto the stage and hung up a map. He also thanked the activists, with the help of which they had a map of the volcano's territory and their defense. He also pointed to a row of weapons behind him, which were more than enough, saying that they bought them at a limited price. And then Phil put in his 2 cents, because even he understood that there were fewer players in the shelter than a volcano, and without a plan, they had no chance. But to this, the main character said that on this occasion he gives each participant in the capture 3 attempts at resurrection. He also explained that killing an ordinary member of the volcano gives 100 points, the leader 500 points, and the boss as much as 1,000 points, which was a very generous event. Players who heard such gifts for the event immediately agreed to such conditions and were ready to register. Linda approached Ron. She also wanted to register for this event. It was clear that she was interested in it. Despite her zeal, the main character warned her that it was very dangerous. And even though she wouldn't feel pain, crawling on her remaining limbs was not always pleasant. Then the girl unexpectedly hugged the guy and said that he should not underestimate her, since her gaming skills were good. This impressed him so much that he no longer argued. Again, she promised the main character not to tell anyone that he was pretending to be another player. When registration was completed and all the players were ready to go on the attack, the main character raised his pistol in the air and fired, thereby starting this event. The players were already armed to the teeth. They were just waiting for the moment when they could finally attack the Vulcan gang. The next day, the head of the volcano decided to reward the 2 talented newcomers and offered them gold as payment for their achievements. They accepted such a generous gift without hesitation. Since the plan was still in force, there is no such thing as too much gold. At that moment, a man ran into the hall. It was one of the gang members. He pointed to the exit and said that many people were approaching their base, definitely like the volcano. Then the mentor calmly said that there were many mine traps around the base, and they would definitely fall into them, so there was nothing to worry about. But the scout did not even think about calming down. He said that all these people had already passed the minefields and there was not a single loss among them. This news greatly surprised the mentor, but he immediately realized that since everything turned out this way, there were traitors among the gang members. And since all the strange things started with the arrival of the new guys, they were the ones who betrayed the gang, and he pointed the finger at them. Mia laughed and deliberately drew all attention to herself and asked the mentor that he was really so stupid that he only noticed this. She made an angry face and confirmed that she was a traitor, and now there was no point in hiding. She pointedly pointed her finger at the leader of the Vulcan gang and called on him to rest in all the deeds he had committed. Ultimately, she took out a weapon and shot at the volcano. He still sat on the throne and did nothing. But the main character jumped in front of him and caught the bullet with his body. He pathetically said that he would protect the head. And at the moment when he had not yet landed, he pulled out a pistol and shot back, right at Mia. The bullet hit the girl in the chest, and she, already half dead, began to fall to the floor. Of course, this whole scene was part of the plan. She fell to the floor and began shouting at the main character that if he helps the enemy, then he himself is not far from him. Afterwards, she turned over on her stomach and began to bleed something out, saying that her comrades would not forget this and would come. The main character approached her, stood naked on her, and pulled the trigger several more times. Of course, he could not have done this. She would have died anyway, but she was causing too much drama, which was unnecessary. When she finally fell silent, the main character turned to the head and said that it was his fault and he did not keep an eye on this girl. So in order to atone for his guilt, he wanted to go into battle. But the head put his hand on his shoulder and said that the guy had already shown himself very well, because he protected him regardless of his own safety. So Vulcan invited him to rest and heal his wounds. Several people appeared from the depths of the hall. They were carrying a huge hammer, which Vulcan was wielding. The head took it in his hands, and the hammer began to burn with flame. Obviously, it was not a simple weapon. Vulcan ordered his people to move forward and fight the imposter. The mentor warned the head that this could be dangerous and that there were still traitors, to which he became angry and grabbed him by the collar. Vulcan said that the mentor did not understand anything and was acting like an ungrateful coward, and with these words he threw him aside. But when Vulcan left, the mentor said that people like him usually die first, and after the battle they will see who was right. The main character sat opposite and told him that he would die anyway, regardless of the outcome of the battle. The mentor didn't understand why he would die because he didn't do anything wrong, and he wanted the main character to explain his words. The guy explained that Vulcan would kill him in any case, because if he loses, it turns out the mentor was right, and if he wins, then the mentor lied to him. These words made sense because Vulcan was a cruel person, so the mentor did not know what to do and asked for advice. The main character put his hand on him and offered to rob Vulcan and divide everything equally, and then go home. Two groups of people stood opposite each other. A big battle was about to begin, and they were waiting for orders. Vulcan said that these people were too few to defeat the Vulcan gang, and offered his fighters 3 crystals for each killed. And after his words, a massacre began. A large bunch of people began to kill each other. Everything was involved there, edged weapons and firearms. Linda also took part in this battle and without much difficulty killed the enemies one after another. She still didn't understand how this game could be so real, because she killed and saw the insides of her enemies. Suddenly a sword pierced her chest. One bandit lurked behind and attacked her from behind, and this attack worked, which he was glad about, because the girl was strong. But when she was supposed to die, something went wrong, and the bandit did not immediately understand what was happening, because usually this did not happen. The girl was engulfed by a greenish light, and she began to come to her senses. The bandits did not understand how this was possible. Linda came to life and was ready to kill her enemies again. The bandits began to realize that they were not dealing with ordinary people. For some reason, they were resurrected. Then the bandits noticed Rex, who very quickly made bags of meat out of his enemies, and it was noticeable that he was a pro in his business. Mia was also there. She was shooting at the bandits with great passion and felt some kind of pleasure from it. For the bandits, these two were a shock, because they personally saw that they were dead, and now they are alive and fighting against them. Chaos began on the battlefield, and the head of the Vulcan gang himself stepped onto the stage, because he was tired of looking at it, and he furiously hit the ground with his hammer. The main character and the mentor stood in front of a safe, the doors of which were really large. The mentor said that he did not have a key, but the main character said that he had his own key, and the mentor did not understand what kind of key it was, because there was a combination lock in the safe. Then the main character decided to show his key. He called it C4 and took it out of his pocket. This was a powerful argument against any door. He placed explosives on the door, and they moved away a little so that they would not be hit by the explosion, because the thing was powerful. When the distance became safe, the main character pressed the button and a strong directed explosion was heard. The door could not withstand this. Indeed, the door could not withstand such an attack and was torn apart, but the main character did not find anything inside. This made him very angry, and he grabbed his mentor because he claimed that all the treasures of Vulcan were here, but it was empty here. Then the mentor said that he had once heard Vulcan say that he hid his gold in a very safe place and no one would find it. Hearing this, the main character decided to stretch his brains and guess where the gold could be hidden, and even unnoticed, and he got an idea. They returned to the throne room, and the main character approached Vulcan's throne with a knife. The mentor did not understand why until the very end. The main character told him that the volcano had been hiding his gold all this time in the most visible place, and began to remove the covering from the throne. At the end of such cleaning, it turned out that the throne, which had stood in the hall for a long time, was completely golden. This decision can be called ingenious. As soon as the gold was discovered, the mentor took out a pistol and said that of course there was enough gold, but not for 2. But before he had time to do anything, a shot rang out and his stomach was ripped open by dozens of bullets. He was already lying half dead and did not understand how it happened, because he had thought everything through well and chose what seemed to be a good moment. Only he did not take into account the fact that the main character had originally planned it this way. He stood with a shotgun and said that the mentor pulled out a pistol too early. Meanwhile, the battlefield was a complete hell. All the members of the Vulcan gang were dead, and their bodies were lying chaotically on the ground. Vulcan personally began the battle, and this greatly complicated the battle. One of the players attacked him once again. Only it was all useless, and Vulcan was able to intercept him with his huge hammer and nail him to the ground. Mia and Rex stood in complete incomprehension. Many players no longer had any lives left, and they could not be resurrected, and they themselves were left with their last lives. This was unfortunate because after so much effort, they had to admit defeat and retreat. Vulcan stood and praised his strength, because in fact, ordinary people could not do anything to oppose the Awakened One. And at that moment, the head of the mentor appeared in front of Vulcan's feet. At first, he did not understand what it was. The main character said that the mentor wanted to betray everyone, so he had to kill him. He sat on the golden throne, and after Vulcan understood everything, he said that since the mentor was already dead, Vulcan himself would be the next. This all seriously angered the bandit, and he began to burn all over because not only had he been betrayed, but they had also encroached on his gold. The main character stood up from the throne and took out his sword. He did not consider himself a traitor since he was a secret agent, and these are different things. He decided to show Vulcan his new technique, and his sword began to pass an electric wave through itself. The main character ran and soared into the air, swinging his sword, from which the lightning was already spreading to the side, and the blow should have been strong. Vulcan reacted to the blow and intercepted the protagonist's sword with his hammer, and the two powerful weapons came into contact. But Vulcan did not calculate that his hammer is metal and transmits electricity well, so the entire charge transferred to him. Because of such a strong discharge, the mask that Vulcan had never taken off fell from his head to the ground. And now the enemy stood face to face with the protagonist, and it was obvious that his face did not look like an ordinary person. And this was true, because instead of a head, this man had a flame that resembled facial features, and whether he was a man or not. He himself considered himself not a human. Since people for him were a lower form of life, he was awakened, and this is a completely different level. After some time, his armor began to crack and fly away from his body, and flames also raged underneath it. Vulcan was completely freed from his metal armor and now stood with absolutely nothing, and was the flame itself. With one slight movement, he surrounded the players with a fiery wind that immediately made them feel hot. But that was just the beginning. After a few seconds, this fiery wind grew into a hurricane, and now people were burning alive due to the incredible temperature. The main character realized that this man was also awakened, and his ability to control the flame made the task much more difficult. Vulcan confirmed the words of the protagonist and agreed that he was awakened, and he considered himself the most successful project. And once all the information was said, he attacked the main character with flames. It was definitely stronger than that of a flamethrower. Mia was very worried, because even she understood that no one would survive such a direct attack, not even this strong guy. But Rex reassured her, because the main character is not so easy to kill. The flame completely consumed the main character, and it seemed that he had no chance of survival. But Vulcan said that his flame was invincible, and if it disappeared, everything would disappear. But not even a few seconds had passed before the main character emerged from the flames unharmed. He even joked that Vulcan's flame was no stronger than his grandmother. Of course, the secret of his safety was in fireproof oil. Before the fight, he applied it to his body, and apparently it was not in vain, since without it, he would have burned without a trace. This surprised Vulcan, but he was not going to stop and said that this was just a warm-up and now there will be a real flame. A flame was directed towards the main character, which in its shape resembled something similar to a dragon with two heads. Since the guy was not going to take such a blow, he took out his sword and decided to use it to repel the attack. The moment the flames almost reached him, he used a sword technique and cut the flame dragon into several pieces, which completely neutralized the flames. Now there was a good opportunity to counterattack Vulcan, and he decided to use a quick attack to end the battle. And since Vulcan did not expect this, the attack was a success, and the guy cut the bandit's body in half, which should have ended the fight. However, Vulcan stood unharmed, and it was clear that this attack did not cause him any damage. He said that it was strong, but unfortunately, he had long since merged with the elements and would not die so easily now. The next moment, he hit the main character in the face, and this blow was very powerful, since the guy was thrown a considerable distance. He crashed into the golden throne and blood splashed out of his mouth. For the first time in a long time, he felt pain, which meant that this awakened one was very strong. After the main character was on the throne, Vulcan used one of his techniques called the Fiery Kingdom of the Dead. After his words, the golden throne on which Ron was began to quickly heat up and melt, changing its shape. Now the main character could not move, since the throne had become his shackles and completely enveloped the guy's limbs. Vulcan said that since he cannot burn the main character, he will simply immobilize him so that he does not escape. But the main character was absolutely ready for this turn of events, because gold could not hold him back for long. Since he owned the system, he opened the exchange and began the process of exchanging the entire golden throne for points, causing the throne to begin to glow. The next moment, this golden structure began to change and smoothly rise upward, disappearing, and the main character received 1,000 points many times. Seeing this, the volcano fell to his knees and began to ask not to touch his gold because it was very valuable to him, and when it ran out, He demanded to return it back, but the main character was not going to do this. Especially after a small fight, he realized how to defeat this fiery man. Since he now had a lot of points, he could afford to buy the highest level of ice level proficiency, which cost 5,000 points. Vulcan flew into a rage after such an act of the protagonist and swore that even if he spent all his life force, he would burn the guy to the ground. At this moment, more and more scorching flames began to emanate from his body, and a two-headed fire dragon appeared above him. The main character also decided to use his new skill and asked Vulcan if he could really defeat him. Opposite the fiery two-headed dragon, a huge ice dragon appeared. It was obvious that the fire would give way to the cold this time. As expected, the ice dragon quickly destroyed the fire dragon, and now he was alone with Vulcan. The bandit himself did not understand how this happened, because just a few minutes ago he had a complete advantage, and now he lost. And after realizing his helplessness, Vulcan accepted his defeat. The ice monster crashed into him with all its strength. Now, in the place of the once formidable bandit, there was only a frozen statue. He clung to life until the last, even if he accepted defeat. It seemed that this did not mean the end, and at some point the ice would crack and the flames would flare up again. But the ice cracked, and the ice statue began to crumble. In the end, it was a victory, and the players were very happy that this battle was finally over. They praised the main character. He stood completely devastated, and it was clear that he was very ill and very tired. As a result, he stood there for a few more seconds, after which he began to fall and lose consciousness, because this battle was truly difficult. 2 days had already passed since that operation, and the main character was lying on the bed. He still had not come to his senses, which was strange, since he did not receive any damage in that battle. Linda and Mia stood in front of his bed, and the girls did not understand why he had not woken up yet, since a lot of time had already passed. A very interesting idea came to Mia's mind, and she decided to try it. Linda didn't know what she was thinking about, but she was interested. Mia took out a knife and offered to kill the main character and wait until he resurrects. But she did not know that this would be the end for him. Linda did not support this idea. The mere thought that they would hurt the person she loved caused inconvenience. She ran up to Mia and hugged her, asking her not to do anything like that because it was impossible. But Mia quickly forgot what she wanted to do, and now compared her breasts with Linda's breasts. It seemed to her that her friends were larger. In the end, she decided to check it out and invited Linda to undress in order to make sure of this. At that moment, the main character opened his eyes. When he got out of bed, he saw Linda with her breasts half open and Mia who was trying to undress her. The situation was as incomprehensible as possible and even more awkward. So he couldn't think of anything better than to say good morning. After some time, the main character came to the main room, where Chloe said that the Vulcan gang was completely destroyed and now all her lands belonged to them. She was also interested in what happened to the guy's face. He replied that it was nothing serious, but it was clear what he got for. He asked if they sent anyone to the central settlement. Chloe said that she temporarily suppressed the spread of information about their victory, and that was the right thing to do, since the Vulcan gang's arsenal needed to be reworked before Drac decided to rebel. She also said that 2 adventurers, or players, had disappeared in recent days, and they had not yet been found, but it was not something serious. At this time, several tied-up people were sitting in a spacious room, with torches burning around them instead of light. These were the same missing adventurers, Phil and Tim. Someone began to enter the room, and they began to ask to be released. A very beautiful girl in a revealing outfit stood in front of them. She was surprised that these people were able to defeat the Vulcan gang. Seeing such a beautiful girl, the guys immediately started drooling. They thought that she was a new non-player character, something like a sexy villainess. The girl took out a whip and introduced herself as Elsa. She also said that she was a member of the final evolution, and the guys had better tell her everything they know, otherwise they will be hurt. After these words, she swung her whip and hit the guys in the face, and it turned out so well that it hit 2 of them at once. After that, she put her foot on Phil's crotch and asked them how they felt when they were hurt. But she couldn't expect that these guys would be happy with such a girl, much less ask her to beat them. For them, it was a cool opportunity to be in the attention of a lovely girl. The girl did not understand how this was possible, because everyone she beat with her whip experienced unbearable pain, and these 2 asked to beat them more. But the guys explained to her the reason for such fearless behavior. They said that these are not real bodies, and therefore they feel pain differently. But unfortunately for them, Elsa turned out to be quite smart and quickly realized that their consciousness was in these shells, and this explained their endurance. The next moment, electricity came out of her hands, and the guys began to feel not very good, and Phil had a bad feeling about it. Meanwhile, the electricity that the girl released from her hands only intensified and began to come out. At the end of this procedure, the guys lost consciousness, and the girl was happy, because now she had their help. She will sneak into the shelter. Meanwhile, the shelter was thriving. There were noticeably more players and 2 girls were walking around the territory. These were very good-looking girls, and they also came up with the idea of looking for handsome guys while they were walking. Phil and Tim came out to meet them, but at first glance it was clear what had happened to them, and now they were behaving strangely. The girl, who did not understand this behavior, thought that they were approaching them and approached Phil, after which she hit him. After that, Phil showed his teeth, which were no longer human-like, and attacked the girl, biting her on the neck. She desperately tried to fight off her attacker, but it was clear that she was inferior in pure physical strength. The second girl did not hesitate and, without wasting time, began to run away from there while Tim rushed after her. At this time, the main character was counting his finances. After converting the Golden Throne into points, he received more than 100,000 points, and he couldn't be happier about it. Erica suddenly ran into the room. She was worried about something. Her first words were that something bad was happening on the street. Ultimately, she was able to squeeze out the main thing that the adventurers, as she called the players, turned into zombies. This news shocked Ron. He decided to go outside and see for himself what was happening. And yes, there was complete chaos outside. Players were attacking each other and biting each other. At that time, Mia was running towards the main character, and it was clear from her that she had lost the rudiments of her mind. The main character grabbed her by the shoulders and pressed her to the wall. Not understanding how this was possible, is it possible to infect a player with a zombie virus? A system notification popped up that explained that this virus only affects the brain and does not affect the body. Eventually, all players will die for real, and due to their condition, it was inevitable. In all corners of the real world, players began to go crazy. While they remained in the game, relatives and friends did not understand what was happening. Some of the players simply lost consciousness and started foaming at the mouth, as if they had been poisoned or it looked like epilepsy. The main character fell into despair. For the first time in a long time, he did not know what to do. The system escalated the situation by claiming that they would all die. Then the main character decided to ask her if it was possible to somehow save them. The system confirmed that this was possible. But for this, it would be necessary to transfer the bodies of the players to this world. The main character stood in front of the system screen and understood that only he was responsible for all this, and only he could save them. The system set a price of 12,000 points for transferring players to this world and did not recommend completing such a task, but the guy could not listen to her. Ultimately, it was all his fault, and now it was his responsibility to save all these people, so he confidently confirmed this operation. The system reproached him for the lack of logic, but to this, the main character replied that this is the essence of humankind. When the points were deducted from the account, the transfer process began. The bodies of the players in the real world began to disintegrate into many parts and disappear. The doctors who had already managed to hospitalize the patients were completely confused and understood that what was happening was beyond the scope of science. Mia, as usual, lay in her room and was in the game. Her body also began to gradually disappear and be transported to another world. The same applied to Rex. He was in his shelter and also became infected with the virus, so he went through the same procedure. Ultimately, in a few minutes, the players were left with only their belongings and glasses, which allowed them to transfer their consciousness to another world. All the news said the same thing. All the patients in a coma disappeared without leaving a trace. The system reported that everything was successful, and all the players were healed. The owner's goal was achieved. But Ron understood that now the worst part remained. All the bodies of the players lay in the center of the settlement. This was done so that when they came to their senses, one could immediately talk to them. A day later, they began to come to their senses. Some did not understand what had happened. Someone noticed that they felt pain, although they turned off this function in the settings, and some remembered that they had become zombies. The main character came on stage and called on everyone to pay attention to him. He said that he would explain everything now, and the news would not be pleasant. The players did not understand what was going to be discussed. Then the main character said loudly and clearly that all the players were in the game for real. Mia did not immediately understand what these words meant because they had been in the game before, which means the chapter was nonsense. Ron decided not to delay the explanation and said that now they would not be able to leave the game, and even more so, they would not be able to resurrect. The players, not believing this, immediately began trying to exit the game, but such a button simply ceased to exist, causing panic to grow. One of the girls pulled out a gun and put it to her head. Because for her it was all nonsense, she decided that if the character died, then she would leave the game. Since this was absolutely wrong, the main character tried to stop her and asked not to do this because he understood that she would die. But the girl shot straight at the weight. It was an instant death and quite absurd, because if she believed it. When she fell, her body remained in the same position, and the players began to realize that this was no longer a shell, but a real corpse, and now they were all trapped. Without having to wait long, the first stone was thrown at the main character, and it was clear why it was thrown. A whole bunch of stones flew after one. People demanded to let them out. They had the right to do so because it was he who let them in here, and all the responsibility lay with him. Covering his face with his hands, he assured people that he understood that it was his responsibility and that he would find a way to return them to the real world. If not, he would die. Mia was the first to respond to his words. She raised her hand and said that she trusted him completely. She also called on the players to calm down, because if they continue to be angry, nothing will change, and she also reminded them that they are players and must deal with this problem. Rex joined her. He supported Mia and added that instead of complaining, they should find a way to strengthen their bodies and become stronger. The noise began to gradually subside, and the players calmed down. It began to dawn on them that they had no other options, and as long as they were serious, everything should be fine. But a new question arose, raising a new wave of panic. They turned to the head of the shelter, how he could guarantee their safety while they were in the settlement. The main character explained that while they were unconscious, he had already thought about this issue and prepared a defense. After these words, he asked someone to come out to defend the settlement, and everyone waited with bated breath. Huge mutant zombies began to approach the players from all sides. They were much larger than ordinary zombies and seemed very strong. The people who were expecting protection were scared to death. Because these monsters did not seem friendly, they began to scream in fear. But all these terrible monsters obediently bent one knee and stood in front of the main character. This was his demonstration of strength. As the panic finally subsided, he introduced these tough guys. They were zombie guards, which he built from the remains of zombies and crystals. But the players still felt that these zombies, although they looked formidable, would still not be able to protect them. Then the main character ordered the release of ordinary zombies in order to demonstrate the abilities of the zombie guards. And at that moment, crowds of zombies poured out of the cells. There were enough of them to destroy all the players present. The players again broke into a sweat, because they understood that these were real zombies coming towards them, but at the same time they did not understand why they had been released. The zombie guards did not wait long, and as soon as ordinary zombies approached a dangerous distance, they began to inexorably pound them into the ground. After the zombie guards finished clearing the territory, they stood behind the main character, and he said that he promised to protect everyone, which means it will be so. Ultimately, this was enough, and all the players went about their business, and a beautiful moonlit night fell in the camp. Mia sat on the roof of one of the buildings and drank, thinking about everything that had happened today. The main character approached her and was surprised to see her there. He said that she looked quite optimistic if she was drinking at such a time. The girl smiled pleasantly and said that she had nothing else to do since problems could not be solved with tears. All that was left was to move forward. The main character was grateful to this girl and told her about it, and he also promised that when she returned to the real world, he would treat her to a drink. The girl just smiled and said that in order to drink, there is no need to wait for something, because they can drink right here and now, and all the worries will wait. The two young people seemed not to know what had happened today. They sat on the roof and drank merrily, as if this evening could be their last. Since the night turned out to be stormy, the main character slept soundly in the morning, and could not wake up as early as always. There was a knock on the door. It was Erica. She came to the main character with the news, but since he did not open the door, she decided to go in herself. From such knocks, the main character managed to wake up and was already starting to get ready when suddenly the door swung open and Erica entered the room. And immediately she regretted her decision, because she saw the main character and what his mother gave birth to, and this made her blush. The main character explained that he likes to sleep naked and there is nothing wrong with that. He also asked what happened that she was so eager to come to him. The girl turned away so as not to embarrass herself even more and said that Drac had arrived to discuss the division of rewards for the destruction of the Vulcan gang. But since these were only the conditions of separation, the main character got dressed and decided to also discuss some conditions. All this time, Drac and his assistant sat quietly in the office and waited for the main character, since upon their arrival he was still sleeping. The bodyguard did not like the behavior of the head of the shelter very much, since they had been waiting for him for half an hour. Finally, the main character came and sat down opposite Drac. As expected, he was able to annoy the guests a little even after his arrival. By the end, the main character's jokes began to anger Drac's assistant, and she could barely restrain herself from starting a fight. Drac stopped his ward and began a very interesting conversation, in which he mentioned that their caravan was attacked and whether Ron could know anything about it. The main character evasively said that the Vulcan gang did this and is there any point in coming to him because of this, and now this gang no longer exists. Drac explained that he was here for precisely this reason. He mentioned that the main character decided to take the Vulcan gang's plant for himself, and as it seemed to Drac, this was too much, and this plant should have been given to the central settlement. This proposal angered Ron, and he, without holding back his tone, said that he, without sparing himself, tried and got this plant, and now someone who has nothing to do with this wants to take it for himself. Hearing this, Drac changed his hand, and instead of it there was a snake on the table, so he decided to put pressure on the main character so that he would change his mind. But this trick did not frighten the head one bit, and he said that just wanting to get something is not enough. You need to offer something in return. This interested Drac, and he, remembering the previous profitable deal, smiled. But he could not know what the main character wanted until he said it himself. Then the main character, without hesitation, pointed his finger at the girl and said that he wanted this bodyguard, which greatly surprised her. After a short pause, the main character continued that if Drac agrees, he will think about giving away the plant. For Drac, this seemed completely pointless, but he still decided to check with the main character if he was sure that he wanted to exchange the plant for a girl. His words passed like a knife through the girl's devoted heart, and she decided to check with the owner whether he really agreed to this. Then Drac turned to her and calmly said that everything would be fine, and didn't she herself say that she would sacrifice herself for his well-being? This scene of love and indifference made the main character laugh a lot, and he decided to interrupt their little quarrel and said that it was a joke and he didn't need anything. Drac got angry from this attitude towards himself. No one dared to joke about him like that, and he said that he intended to resolve the issue today, so he brought someone with him. To this, the main character just smiled and pointed his finger towards the door, and then asked the question, "Aren't these the people we're talking about?" When they went outside, there was a bunch of mutilated soldiers lying there. Despite all this was the elite army of the central settlement, and Drac was surprised. Hearing the words about the elite army, Ron pathetically said that he, by the way, was also their elite, and he also advised not to attack the shelter since his army had lost. Having finished this, the main character hit the door with his fist, causing it to shatter into pieces, as if it had been shot with buckshot. Drac realized that the main character was no longer going to cooperate, and now they were enemies. To which Ron said that in this world, everything is decided in a fight. The head of the central settlement did not keep him waiting long and quickly left, finally threatening that everything would be seen in the future. The two got into their expensive car and drove away from the camp. Erica, who saw everything, was afraid whether everything would be fine, because after all, they let the head of the central settlement go alive. The main character understood that killing Drac now was extremely unprofitable, and he doubted that this arrogant one would be an easy opponent. Arriving at the central settlement of Drac together with his bodyguard, they immediately went to the laboratory. The assistant was here for the first time. Drac kindly explained to the girl that he had been making observations for some time and came to the conclusion that everyone has their own limit. He walked up to the large computer and started typing something on the buttons. He thought that the main character suspected something and therefore started a riot. After the text was typed, Drac confirmed his action and a metal ball began to open at the bottom of the room, with green smoke escaping from it. And when the ball opened completely, something similar to a zombie crawled out of it, but this specimen was clearly different from the others. A squad of elite soldiers with machine guns at the ready ran into the room. They surrounded the monster and were about to attack it. As soon as all the soldiers were ready, the command to shoot was given and a hail of bullets fell on the monster, causing it to roar, but it was not a cry of pain, but rather of anger. A moment later, the monster pushed off the ground and flew straight toward the soldier standing in front of him, huge sharp scythes sticking out of the monster's hands. He swung them as if he was mowing down the grain harvest. People could not do anything and only scattered into pieces from these attacks. Not even a few minutes had passed before the entire squad was destroyed, and the monster stood in the center of the room and roared a victorious cry. It was a complete disaster for the bodyguard that one zombie was capable of destroying an entire squad, and in such a short period of time. Drax stood and rejoiced at the end of this experiment, because now he had such a strong monster, and his goal was to create an army of such creatures. He said all this while being in a separate wing of the laboratory, in which there were many glass capsules, which obviously contained the same creatures. He laughed like an evil genius, because now he could take revenge on Ron, and when the army was ready, it would be his hideout that would take the first blow. A week has already passed since Drac arrived in the settlement. The main character spent every day practicing sword control, and today there was an hour of training. While he was engrossed in training, he did not notice how people approached him, and one of them asked if he was the head of the shelter. In front of the main character stood a group of people who asked to take them all into a shelter, since their house had turned into an abode of evil. Ron quickly realized that these were residents of the central settlement and asked them to explain to him what had happened there, that they had come to such a distance, and also to look for shelter. All these people were depressed, many were crying, even though they were men. One of them said that a massive infection of the zombie virus had begun in the central settlement. According to this man, a few days ago he was walking home with his friend after a good drinking session. They could barely move their legs. Suddenly, a huge figure appeared behind them. Its body blocked the sun and plunged the friends into shadow. This man noticed this figure late. He heard the cry of his comrade and turned around toward the sound, pouring out a cold sweat and immediately sobering up. In front of him stood a 3-meter zombie who was holding the body of his comrade in his hands without a head. He simply bit it off, as if it were an apple. When he finally realized what was happening, he rushed with all his might away from there. He screamed throughout the street, calling for help, for security. But the longer he ran, the more he realized that no one would save him, and such creatures were now throughout the entire settlement. He was right. Many swarms of the city plunged into chaos and now looked more like hell. All buildings and equipment were covered in fire, and huge zombies walked the streets. After such difficult memories, the man began to cry even more and grabbed his head with his hands. He and a few others managed to escape, but there were probably survivors there. The main character still perceived this as a kind of test. He calmly asked where their army was, because in the central settlement it was not small, and they also had a leader, Drac. The mere mention of this name infuriated this man. According to him, it was because of Drac that the virus appeared, since he was conducting experiments, and one test subject escaped and the massacre began. He also said that the head of the central settlement himself locked himself in his castle and didn't care about the ordinary people who came to him for help. After all that was said, this man fell to his knees and began to beg the main character for help, because his wife and daughter were still in this hell. Following him, all the other refugees began to kneel down and ask to save their loved ones, acquaintances, soulmates, because they all knew that the main character had defeated the leader of the volcano. The main character approached these people, folded his hands into a cross, and began to say that he was far from a hero and certainly not a good person. But he opened his hands and said that despite this, there was no phrase in his dictionary, leave to the mercy of fate, and he promised to kill the head of the central settlement. The next day, Ron organized a large meeting, during which he announced that he planned to assemble a team of volunteers to clear the central settlement and save people. There was a small problem with all this. The former players were now afraid to go on dangerous missions, because now they did not have the opportunity to be resurrected, and therefore it was not worth the risk. The main character understood the reason for their fear, but they also had to understand that this concerns everyone, because if the central settlement falls, they will be next in line. Erica volunteered from the crowd, even though she was scared, but she understood how terrible it was to lose dear people, and did not want to see this. The main character was glad that she agreed, but she was not a player, and he did not understand why she should get involved in this. But this sweet girl's explanation was as simple as herself. She simply did not want to sit back and wait for her death, but wanted to fight for life. After Erica, Mia and Linda agreed to this adventurous task. Although they were girls, they had very unshakable ideals. Rex also responded to the call of the head of the settlement, who asked to double the reward because now it could cost his life. And Nika also responded to this call. Seeing such a spirit, the rest of the players decided not to give in. Especially to non-player characters, they firmly decided that they would destroy all the enemies. Seeing such a picture, the main character even shed tears, because he did not expect that all these people would agree to risk their lives to help him after what happened. Nika saw this and became curious. Is the main character really crying over such little things? After this friendly joke, he wiped away his tears and asked if he was such a strong person and did not have the right to be gentle. Soon after the meeting, the group moved to the central settlement, the territory of which, by the way, was fenced with very high walls, which made it impossible to simply climb over them. But the main character clearly didn't want to do something like that, and why should he, when you have several huge zombies that could serve as a battering ram? The idea of opening the gate like the good old times was a success. For such strong monsters, it was not difficult to open the gate in this way. When the gates were completely open, the main character entered the territory of the main settlement along with his entire team. He was in anticipation of a new and grandiose battle. When they entered the territory of the settlement, a terrible sight opened before them. The entire city was on fire. Crowds of infected people were roaming the streets and finishing off the surviving people. A young and beautiful girl was driven into a corner by one of the zombies and she had nowhere to run. She could only helplessly ask the monster not to come near her. But when the zombie was almost level with her, the instinct of self-preservation gave her a second wind, and she screamed as loud as she could for help. And exactly at that moment, the zombie's head was pierced through by a bullet fired from a pistol. This was a real salvation at the last moment. Although the girl was saved, she was still scared and trembling. She did not understand what had happened, much less who had saved her. The savior of this girl turned out to be Mia. She, smiling friendly, extended a helping hand to the trembling girl and made her happy that they had come to save everyone. At this time, Linda and Erica fought fiercely with zombies, cutting them up in whole packs. They took the brunt of the blow on themselves so that the rest could save the residents. Phil and Tim took advantage of the opportunity to move freely, saving people who were already exhausted and most likely inhaled smoke, from which some lost consciousness. The door of the laboratory was very dense. It was somewhat reminiscent of the door of a volcano bunker since it was just as massive. But, as it should have been, since the bunker door was able to fall apart from the C4 charge, this door was attacked in the same way and a strong explosion occurred. As a result, as the main character expected, the door could not stand it, and after the explosion, a good hole formed in its center. The main character assumed that since this door led to the laboratory, then the zombies came from here, and since they came from here, it means that Drac is hiding somewhere here. Mia stood next to the main character, proudly straightening her shoulders. She said that she was the only one who could go with him, since the rest were busy saving people. This time, the main character was more attentive than usual and said that it was better for her to return to the others, since no one knows what awaits them inside, and it is unlikely that he will be able to help her. But the girl already knew in advance that the main character would talk about it and was not surprised. It didn't even offend her. Resigned to his decision, she asked him to be sure to return alive, because he promised to bring all the players back, which means his word must be kept. When he entered the laboratory, he did not see anyone. The room was in absolute destruction, and all the flasks were broken, which made the place look even gloomier. Suddenly, a mutant similar to a girl appeared in front of the main character, and it was clear from her that she was dangerous because she was different from other zombies. She sharply waved her hand towards the main character's head, but he was able to dodge this attack, although for this he had to show miracles of flexibility. Looking more closely at this creature, the main character caught himself thinking that he had already met this girl somewhere. And he was right. This zombie girl turned out to be Drac's bodyguard. The mutation did not change her much, but it was almost impossible to recognize her immediately, only by her clothes. She again rushed at the main character, intending to attack him, and this time she was more persistent than the previous one, so the guy had to take out his sword. Covering herself with a katana, the main character was able to block her blow, and it became clear that her hands were as strong as metal. This very situation angered the guy, as he began to hate Drac even more. due to the fact that even his bodyguard became infected with the virus. But it was impossible to stand like this forever. So he threw her back and was going to break forward, because he could not be here forever. He had many ways to kill her quickly, but he decided to simply neutralize her and use the Thunder Sword technique. After the sword touched her, she was hit by a strong discharge. It shouldn't have killed her, but it should have been enough to immobilize her. And so it happened. After this attack, the girl fell to the ground and did not move anymore, which gave hope that she could somehow be saved. The main character stood over her and held a sword in his hands. He did not know what to do next in such a situation, because he did not want to kill her. The girl came to her senses and turned to the main character. She asked him to save her. This meant that she could still think and wanted to live. Since she could speak, it meant that she was not yet completely under control of the virus, which meant there was little chance of saving her. Having logged into the system, the guy began to look for an antidote for the virus, and fortunately for her, there was such a vaccine. He quickly bought it since there was no time to waste. Holding the syringe to her arm, he told her that the vaccine could help, but whether it would help or not depended entirely on her. Fortunately, she was lucky and the vaccine worked. The girl almost instantly regained her sanity and normal appearance. But she did not remember what happened. The main character decided not to lose this opportunity and approached the girl very close. He told her that he saved her, and now she needs to figure out how to pay him back. The girl was glad that she was saved, but she was surprised that she was saved by the main character, because according to the idea, he should not be here. Since now she was saved by this guy, she decided to give him a syringe with a cloudy liquid, and the main character did not know what it was for. The girl called the liquid in this syringe a strengthening potion. With its help, Drac creates zombies and creates chaos in the settlement. She was angry at her patron, because he had completely gone crazy and even made her a test subject, but she managed to steal this little thing before passing out. The main character accepted this gift, but this did not change the fact that using it is dangerous and it will turn him into a zombie. The girl convinced the main character that this syringe would not be dangerous for him, but on the contrary, it would strengthen him, because the guy is strong and can handle it. Since this syringe was needed to defeat Dracom, the main character was not happy about this, because he was sure that he would kill him with his own strength. While he was talking, the girl took out a knife and resolutely pointed it at her throat. She definitely wanted to kill herself. She decided to kill herself because of Drac, because she thought that he was a good leader and would lead their settlement to a bright future, so she helped him, but everything turned out completely wrong, and now she does not deserve to live. But at the last moment, when the blade almost reached its target, the main character grabbed it with his hand, cutting his fingers, and stopped it. The girl cried and did not understand why the main character was stopping her from committing suicide, because someone like her did not deserve to live. To this, the main character replied that he saved her life, and now her life belongs to him, so he forbids her to die, and when he returns, he will punish her for this suicide attempt. Such words made the girl happy, and she calmed down. A slight smile appeared on her face. She agreed with his conditions and said that she would wait for him. The main character walked deep into the laboratory, and everywhere he went there was complete destruction. This meant that the creatures that got out of here were extremely aggressive. At the end of the corridor, Drac was waiting for him. He sat in front of a large monitor and watched people running away from zombies. But not everyone succeeded. He was also expecting the main character. The main character did not wait long and immediately took out his sword. He told Drac that people believed him and thought that he would lead them to heaven, but he sent them straight to hell. When Drac turned around, he showed his snake head. He said that this is just a study of the virus. Since the human body has a limit, he is not going to stop. He decided that he would no longer be human, and after that, his head headed towards Ron. It was amazing how far it could stretch. But this attack was too slow, and the main character was able to dodge his head without much difficulty and chop it off with one swing. The snake's head hit the floor noisily. Even though he was fierce, everything has its own strength, and his neck turned out to be not particularly hard. The main character raised his head by his hair and did not understand how this could be. He was absolutely sure that this man was not weak and the battle should be harder. And he was right, because as soon as he raised his head, it turned out that it was not dead and could well function separately from the body. It came as a surprise. Not only was it sharp, but she also had a lot of strength. She was able to reach the main character's neck and bite him. Having torn his head from his neck, The main character saw a headless creature standing in front of him, similar to a snake, but it had many arms and small heads. This creature attacked the main character with one of its small heads. It was approaching the main character at high speed and was in the form of a spear. And when the main character tried to dodge this attack, he realized that his body was not listening to him. It was because of the poison that got into him through that head. And when it seemed that the end could not be avoided, Mia appeared in front of him. She stood in front of the snake and blocked the trajectory of its flight with her body. It was a human shield. The snake pierced her side right through and she grabbed it, not allowing it to crawl back out. The main character did not understand what this girl had forgotten here. She turned to him with empty eyes and there were tears on them. Blood was leaking from her lips. She simply could not leave the main character alone and followed him secretly. Meanwhile, the monster became three-headed and these heads were big. Each of them spoke, and they all claimed that this was the end for these two. This is what happens when you go against Drac. And in order to finish off the wounded people, he used dozens of small snakes, which were supposed to pierce them through. But this did not happen. Instead of what he expected to see the snakes, he saw how all his small heads were cut off in an instant. The main character, meanwhile, took out a syringe with an evolution potion from his hand. Since there was a critical situation and even his girlfriend had died, he decided to put everything on the line. After this injection, his body underwent some transformation, and his left arm was now an order of magnitude larger and more powerful, and his whole body became red. The snake was furious. He immediately realized that this was his evolution potion, and he wanted to know where his enemy got this thing from. But while he was asking his meaningless questions, the main character jumped into the air and prepared to attack this monster. He grabbed one of its heads and tore it off without much effort. This was a test of his new strength because he needed to get used to it. The snake only confirmed that it was useless and that the main character could not kill him, since he could restore himself almost immediately. Realizing that the spear snakes would now not work, Drac decided that he could dissolve the main character with poison and splashed it out of his heads. The main character decided not to dodge and simply take this attack on himself, covering himself with his new hand, because it was supposed to withstand it. It was painful, but this attack did not leave any serious damage. Only smoke came from the hand, which significantly reduced visibility. While the main character did not see anything, Drac decided to absorb him so that he would become one with him. And when the smoke cleared, the main character saw a large snake head in front of him, which was definitely going to swallow him. He did not have time to dodge this, so the snake swallowed the main character without any problems and was sure that this was the end of their fight. But he didn't know that the main character was just waiting for this, and now a real battle began, and not a game of cat and mouse. The snake managed to regret his hasty decision, because after a few seconds he began to feel that something was happening inside his body. This strength in his body was growing, and he did not know what to do with it. Eventually his stomach began to crack little by little, which meant defeat for him. And the next moment the main character's hand came out of his stomach. This meant that it was not possible to absorb him, and now he got out. The snake stood with his stomach torn open and could not understand how he lost, because he considered himself a higher being and completely absorbed the lower being, and it was able to escape. The main character decided to end this meaningless monologue of the villain and used his hand. It increased in length and grabbed the snake, after which she began to absorb him. And in the end, it turned out that the Supreme Being was destroyed by his own weapon and helplessly shouted that he did not agree with this. After a short period of time, there was nothing left of the kite, and the protagonist's hand was not strong and wanted to return to its normal size. It became clear that this power had not yet been completely mastered, and now his body could not withstand such a load, and the power began to get out of control. Since he could not allow this to happen, he decided to use freezing, which was supposed to stop the effect of the virus. This helped, and after a few seconds the hand returned to normal. The main character helplessly collapsed on the floor and lost consciousness, since the use of such force took all his energy. Several days have passed since that incident in the central settlement. The main character was admitted to the hospital, where he was gradually recovering, but had not yet come to his senses. Although he looked shabby and his arm was completely broken, he was still in good condition, and today he finally came to his senses. Hearing his movements, the girls immediately ran to the bed. Chloe considered this a medical discovery, and Linda and Erica were simply glad to see him awaken. The main character was able to get out of bed and did not understand at all how he survived. For him, it seemed like a good dream. But in the end, he decided to find out how things were. Erica immediately began reporting on the work done and reported that after Ron killed Drac, the players saved the villagers. And now that all threats have been eliminated, the city is being completely restored, and it has been moving at a fairly fast pace. When the guy approached the open window, he saw a crowd of people. They all greeted him and decided to worship him as a deity for saving them. But the main character was not at all happy, because he remembered that Mia sacrificed herself and he wanted her to see this scene, and he still didn't know her real name. And while he stood depressed and talked about it, a slipper flew into the back of his head. And the owner of this slipper was just Mia. She was intact and was already able to recover, and Nao was also with her, who was holding her. Seeing Mia, the main character was again ready to cry, because he actually thought that she had died then, and he would not see her again. And here she was, right in front of him, alive. She was angry with him that he forgot his promise, since they agreed to have a drink after it was all over, and she also told him to remember her name,